I'm calling to order this hearing. This is a public hearing of the Committee of the Whole of the Council of the District of Columbia. I'm Phil Mendelson, Chair of the Council and Chair of the Committee of the Whole. Today is Friday, December 5th, 2025. The time is 9:50 in the morning, and we are having this hearing in room 412 of the John A. Wilson Building. This is an oversight hearing, and the subject of this hearing is housing code inspections and rental property conditions. Reading from the hearing notice, one of the core functions of the Department of Buildings is to inspect rental housing properties for compliance with the district's property maintenance code, which is meant to ensure that structures and units are habitable and safe. Each year, the department inspects thousands of units based on tenant complaints or for the purpose of a proactive inspection. In 2024, this committee issued an oversight report in which it found numerous deficiencies with the department's housing code inspection process. The report made 26 recommendations to strengthen the department's housing code inspection process. Today's oversight hearing, will be an opportunity to collect testimony from the public and the department as to whether progress has been made in improving the housing code inspection process. The committee also welcomes any testimony on legislative proposals on housing inspections and rental property conditions. The Committee of the Whole has performance oversight hearings every late winter, like February, maybe early March. All the committees of the council have these performance oversight hearings. Usually there are a lot of testimony, a lot of witnesses, and it's to cover the whole range of whatever issues there are with a particular agency or multiple agencies, depending upon the hearing. And it's not as good an opportunity as today, where we're more focused on housing code inspections and rental property conditions. So I'm looking forward to the testimony hearing from the public with regard to what progress we're making or not making as a government in ensuring that our rental housing properties are code compliant and safe. And as I noted in the hearing notice, we also welcome any legislative proposals with regard to housing inspections and rental property conditions. We have 31 witnesses. I did look twice. It looks like it's more than that. So we're going to try to move this along at a clip. Before I call up the first group of witnesses, I'm going to recognize a colleague, Councilmember Robert White, who chairs our housing committee. So there's some relevance here.
Glad to be relevant, Chairman. Thank you very much for holding this hearing. Thank you to folks who are joining us virtually or in person. Just very briefly, as chair of the Housing Committee, I am very consistently seeing housing conditions that are not good. And some of the issues I see, they come down to bad communication between management and tenants. Some of these issues are a whole lot worse than that. And certainly, there are times and instances where landlords are at fault, but there are also a lot of times where our agencies that are supposed to make sure buildings are in habitable conditions are falling down on the job, and people are left living in these conditions. So when you see these bad conditions as consistently as I do, it screams that you have to do something. And we have, my team and I worked hard to develop legislation, some of which we've rolled out, some of which we'll be rolling out in the coming weeks. But hearing from residents, getting that feedback is really helpful. And I'm going to continue to be in buildings, checking out conditions, talking to tenants, talking to owners and managers to diagnose the issues and working to make sure we resolve them. Because at the end of the day, what people want is not a lot of hearings, not a lot of legislation. They want better housing conditions. And so our challenge is to get there as quickly as possible. Chairman, thank you for your diligence on this issue and for holding this hearing. And again, thank you to everyone who's joined.
Thank you, Councilmember White, and thank you as well for your chairmanship of the Housing Committee. I'm going to call witnesses. We have four seats at the table. So if witnesses are in person, which is something I love, then I will stop when we get to four. Some folks will be participating virtually, and I will, of witnesses as I call, if we have more who are virtual, I'll keep going on the list. Farrah Foss, who is Community Development Director with Empower DC. Andrea Chapman, who is Community Organizer with Empower DC. Jushelle Powell. Are you Ms. Powell? And Cheryl Woodland. She's online.
Yeah.
Shay Pasha. How about Denise? We will stop there. Ms. Foss.
Good morning, Chairperson Mendelson, Councilmember White. My name is Farah Fosse, and I'm the Community Development Director at Empower DC, which uses community organizing to advance racial, economic, and environmental justice, including housing justice. My coworker, Andrea Chapman, who will testify after me, and I work with renters from across the city, but primarily from wards 5, 7, and 8. In our Tenant Power campaign, tenant leaders come together to share information, strategies, and resources to prevent displacement. These residents have identified unsafe and unhealthy housing conditions as a major cause of displacement and affordable housing loss. Renters across DC know that the city can do a much better job enforcing the housing code and ensuring residents live in safe, healthy housing. I've submitted with my written testimony our Tenant Power platform for decent, safe, and healthy housing, which was created in part to provide tenant recommendations for DOB's 3-year strategic enforcement plan. When we talk about housing code violations, we're talking about protecting health, life safety, affordable housing, and preventing displacement. Neglect pushes tenants out of affordable housing. Buildings are closed from disrepair, leading to displacement. And recently, a DC resident lost her arm in an elevator that had been consistently cited for housing code violations. The district lacks the processes and laws to compel bad actors to follow the housing code. Landlords know they won't be required to make repairs or even pay fines if they don't repair within the required timelines. DC residents can follow all of the processes and use every system, spend countless hours, and continue living in unsafe, unhealthy housing. I'd like to highlight some of our recommendations. Formalize DOB's alternative resolution team into a structured hearing process with tenant participation, mediation, and rent escrow. This group already works closely with landlords to resolve infractions. Having an in-house process could lead to faster adjudication, repairs, and greater trust. Currently, OAH is very slow, and OAH doesn't have the power to actually mandate repairs. Create a rent escrow system, either in ART or in housing conditions court, so tenants can pay rent into escrow while seeking repairs and not face eviction, as they currently do in landlord-tenant court. And also that clogs up landlord-tenant court. Ensure landlords can't take the annual rent control rent increases unless the unit actually complies with the housing code. This is already the law, but it's not what happens. Prioritize the use of DOB's nuisance abatement fund for life safety repairs, and then use a special assessment to recoup that money so it can be an actual revolving fund for safety repairs. Create a nuisance property tax bracket, similar to what we already do with vacant properties. This would be for serious and repeat offenders. Make sure that DCHA is only entering into subsidy, including voucher contracts, with landlords who don't have continuing serious violations. And create a tenant receivership process. We were pleased to see the law that Councilmember White recently introduced, the Strong Homes Amendment Act. We support the intentions and provisions of this bill. I want to make, and especially that the landlord has to have a complete abatement plan, and that a property can only be sold to a potential owner with a complete abatement plan to prevent displacement. It'll be really key to make sure that this, that the tenant receivership abatement fund is fully funded, right? To make sure that repairs can be made so that tenants can remain in place and that the receivership law can be used early enough. And last one is just to pass the Housing with Integrity Amendment Act. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ms. Chapman.
Good morning. My name is Andrea Chapman. I'm a community organizer at Empower DC. I'd like to highlight some of the key recommendations that tenants prioritize in the Tenant Power platform. First, I'll discuss inspection reports and tracking. Only 60% of tenants Empower DC spoke to received post-inspection reports, causing them to be confused about abatement and resolution after a completed inspection. DOB should ensure reports, including re-inspections for which reports are not currently issued, are provided to all tenants and/or advocates in a way that works for them, including email and online. DOB should follow up with tenants post-inspection to ensure landlords are complying with abatement timelines, including by issuing post-issue surveys. If landlords aren't complying, DOB should have an automated process to move the issue to the next stage of enforcement, and that should include in-person re-inspections. DOB should also improve communication and transparency with residents in inspections and enforcement. While DOB's public dashboard provides helpful information on outstanding code violations, tenants cannot see next steps in the process or any enforcement steps taken by DOB. Tenants should be able to follow the inspections and enforcement process for any code violations in their housing, including through mechanisms like automated text similar to tracking a package. The dashboard's landlord violation tool could be updated to show a case status, including scheduled re-inspection dates if the landlord has marked the violation as abated, OAH referrals, and fine collections. Tenants report they don't always know what to expect when following an inspection, whether DOB is working to encourage abatement and what steps could be taken. Tenants are not told what to do if an infraction is not fixed within required timelines. DOB should work with tenants, community organizations, and attorneys to create language-accessible, tenant-facing educational materials describing the inspection and enforcement process like inspection prep, required repair timelines, and what to do if you experience landlord retaliation. These materials should be supplemented by strengthened inspector communication with tenants throughout the entire process, including contacting tenants if inspectors can't get into a building and inspection time changes. Inspectors should proactively know all violations, including ones not originally cited by the residents. Inspectors should ensure property owners don't interfere with the inspection, either through intimidation or by hiding problem areas. We also asked that DOB create a process for request-based property-wide inspections. We asked for one for a property we're working in called Benning Park in Ward 7, and DOB said that the tenants had to request these inspections individually, making DOB go back to the same property within, multiple times within a week, which is inefficient. So we asked that we at least have property-wide inspections for tenant associations or attorneys or community organizations that are working with residents. And then two more things. We just asked that, we know that DOEE is going to change their process for mold inspections. They're going to phase them out. So we just asked that there's a finalized mold inspection and enforcement process and that it's fully funded within the next fiscal year. And then last thing, we asked DOB to implement quarterly meetings with tenants so that we can continue to inform the strategic enforcement plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chapman. Jashelle Powell.
Grand Rising, my name is Jashelle Powell. I'm here to speak on some of the issues that I have faced when it comes to living in housing. One of the major issues that I did face was with living in a home that had mold so severe that it took up the entire crawl space of the home. They actually wanted to charge her like $12,000 to fix it. She didn't want to fix it. Any and everyone who came in the home, they suffered from headaches to the point where my son had to go through emergency surgery to have his adenoids and tonsils removed. The only reason why I got quick help to get out of there because I wrote a letter to President Obama and he forwarded my stuff over to HUD, which they end up calling me and hurrying up to get us out of there, but they moved us to another unit that also had mold. It was hidden underneath the carpet. Going back and forth to court with the landlord to even get the carpet removed out of the place, but I still had to pay rent. But we suffered dramatically being in there. I recently just lost my mom in a unit. She was placed in the wrong unit and she passed from carbon monoxide poison. She was only in that unit for 30 days. Communicating with Department of Buildings, I have reached out to them several times. The reason they told me they would not inspect the unit that my mom passed in was because she was no longer in it. So that needs to be enforced a little bit more in reference to what they're doing. I've been in contact with DOEE too. Only thing that they was worrying about doing is just moving me out. Everybody is just worrying about moving us to another place that already have bandages over their issues and problems, and we're still suffering. We can't see none of the stuff that we're inhaling in these units either. But we have to live in here and we have to pay rent. For them to keep on covering up and they get paid for us to die slow, my child suffer. I lost my mom. I don't know how bad my own health is getting from going through all the trauma that I'm dealing with in these houses. So the only thing I think that needs to be done, a lot of these buildings need to be broken down and put back together, because from that earthquake that happened back in 2011, August 23rd, everybody was mandatory supposed to go out there and inspect their properties. These landlords don't know how to properly inspect the properties. So Department of Buildings should have been out there with them to inspect the units to make sure that they actually fix the damage that happened to the units. The monument in the Capitol was worked on for 3 years to fix the cracks. They took 30 days to put coke in between the cracks that formed in the building. That is not fixing the issue. So I think it need to be enforced a little bit more. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Powell. I'm sorry you've been having those challenges. If you want to give us a copy of your statement, please do. Ms. Woodland, Cheryl Woodland, who I believe is online. Cheryl Woodland. Maybe we'll come back to her. Ms. Pasha.
Hello? Good morning.
Please proceed, Ms. Woodland.
I'm sorry. I was having a little technical difficulty. Good morning, everyone. I would just like to say, listening to everything that everyone else said, I won't take up too much of your time because they have covered most of what I'm thinking. I would just like to note that and actually thank Project Empowerment because they have been the voice for the tenants. We don't always understand some of the language, and they're way more knowledgeable to help bridge that gap, to help us to understand what's going on as far as our rights and just different things that we can do to help our situation. So that's pretty much it. I just feel like it should be more training, and I see the end from where the tenants sit. I've seen like a lot of different things, and I'm listening to Ms. Powell's story, and there actually are so many Ms. Powells in this world. Like it's so many people that are suffering through this that you kind of lose count. So it has to be something done where all of Ms. Powell, I mean, she had help with her situation, but there's so many people that fall through the cracks and so many people that doesn't even have access to affordable housing. We're privileged to at least have a place to live, but it's not really functional because it's probably doing more damage than good. There are so many people who are getting sick. My mom suffers from real bad headaches, probably from all the mold and different things that's going on. She had mold actually behind her bed where she sleeps. And this has been going on for years. And it's unbelievable that it's been years and no one has figured it out yet. So I'm just grateful for all of their work and them helping to help with the legislature and all the things that we need to get done to get the process started, because going backwards and blaming landlords are not always right, tenants are not always right, but we need to figure out something that helps to bridge the gap, because just pointing fingers has never worked. It's not working now. So I'm just hoping that with their help also that we can just get something in place to where we can start the process of getting to that place. So I'm just going to stay hopeful and just, keeping the race so that I can hopefully be a part of the process also in getting it done, because I would just like to see people in better homes, safer, healthier, and just better living conditions, better housing choices. It's not a one-shop stop. Inclusionary zoning is different things that they have out there, but it's not going to work for everybody. So I'm just hoping that we all can figure out something that makes it work for the majority.
Thank you, Ms. Woodland.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to submit a written statement, you're welcome to. Ms. Pasha?
Good morning. So like Ms. Woodland stated, that pretty much the difficulties have been stated regarding mold, carbon monoxide, lead, and things of that nature. I'm more about how to rectify the situation right now. I feel like the landlords and the property managers are running one of the most infamous pyramid schemes known to man right in front of everyone's eye, and nothing's being done. They're constantly, you're paying to get into these buildings or into this scheme, and then you're told, they only survive on, lying to others and getting them into it and bringing them money in their building, and it only falls when we stop paying. And they're only concerned about that because it affects their rent, it affects their mortgage, it affects their paycheck. So now they want to know, where's their money? Well, we want to know, where's the money going? It's not going back into the property. And I feel like, if their penalties or their punishments were worse than what they're being, held with, then maybe they do more or they do better. I feel like, if their fines were more than, we pay more in our rent than their fines. And if their fines were higher, they do more to not have to pay that money. They do more, if their buildings were gonna be condemned, then they do more to make sure that didn't happen so they can keep getting their money. Like, they are allowed to practically get away with murder and only get probation. They're only responsible for putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. If you look at it in that perspective versus it's a little something. We just have to fix that. All we're required to do. Why is that their requirement? They're breaking the law every day and they're allowed to just pay a fine. They're not given prison, they're not, that's crazy. They're the only criminals I know that can break the law in front of everyone's eyes, in front of the government's eyes, and not be penalized for it, not be held responsible for it. That's ridiculous. And I would, at this point, I want to get a property and just run a scheme and scam and get me some money, because it's clearly you can do that. And the Department of Buildings, if all they're coming to inspect is the units, the buildings. My mold inspector said he smelled mold when he came into the building before he got to my unit. But he can't inspect the building unless the property asks them to or the government asks them to. And clearly the Department of Buildings doesn't give a about the buildings. They are the Department of BS. That's what they're about. They're not about solving anything. And the fact that the government, as far as the federal government, is not holding them to that standard for what they're supposed to be doing and making them do their jobs, threatening them that they may lose their jobs. They don't care. They don't have to live in that. They don't want to live in that. They won't live in that. And it's cool. It's us. We're going to be the defendants always. We're going to be held more responsible than the people who are deserving to be responsible, but it is what it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pasha. And if you want to submit a written statement, you're welcome to do that as well. I thank you, each of you, for your testimony. 5 minutes. I wanted to ask a couple questions with the two representatives from Empower DC. Ms. Chapman, you, near the end of your statement, said something about how DOE is discontinuing, phasing out mold inspections. Well, then who's going to do them?
Yeah, well, we heard that the process is going to change and that that's no longer going to be under DOE.
So will it be under
We already
DOE?
asked them
Because that would be an improvement.
Well, we're saying that we're happy, we want it to be housed under DOB, but we're just saying that there needs to be a process as soon as possible because of all of the issues that we just heard. So,
Okay.
Yeah, that's what we're saying.
So let me,
I believe when we asked DOB at the recent stakeholder meeting, they did not have any plan to start mold inspections. DOE has said they are phasing out mold inspections, and they've never been able to do enforcement, which has been a problem. So our request is that the DOB have the funding and have the processes to actually be able to do mold inspections.
I would agree with that. Let me ask you, Ms. Fosse, you had a number of bullet points. I'm not
Yes.
going to ask you about each one, but the first one struck me as adding bureaucracy.
What
And
was that?
sometimes,
Oh.
I mean, I get what you're saying that OAH is very slow. But setting up a new, formalizing the alternative resolution team into a structured hearing process is setting up a whole new hearing mechanism. I'm sure there would be a fiscal impact.
Yep.
I'm reasonably certain we wouldn't be able to fund it. So tell me how we can make that work.
Yeah, I think there's a couple issues with OAH. Of course, there's the timelines, there's the lack of judges. And I agree, I don't think we need to make a parallel process because of that. There's also a couple structural issues. OAH can mandate fines, but they can't actually mandate repairs. And tenants are not involved in that process. So it's entirely between, it's with DOB attorneys and the landlord, right? And so the landlord could say, well, I could never get into the unit. There's no one to say whether or not that was true. Or they could say, oh, we made repairs and maybe the repair, lasted for a couple days. So not having the actual people living there just doesn't really make sense. DOB does already work with landlords through this alternative resolution process. So I don't know that it needs to be a totally structured hearing, but there may be ways to bring in residents. The other piece that we need that maybe could be done through Housing Conditions Court is rent escrow. I don't think it makes sense for the city that the one place where tenants can withhold rent is in landlord-tenant court. It means that you have a bunch of unnecessary cases in landlord-tenant court. People are intentionally withholding rent just to get attention to their poor housing conditions. So it makes, it creates more issues in landlord-tenant court, and it's putting people at risk of eviction who shouldn't be at risk of eviction. They're the defendants, and really all they want are repairs. I think with a lot of these, we might end up having less of those if we could do more enforcement and actually be getting repairs through this process. But I think there should be some process where there's a rent escrow where tenants aren't at risk of eviction.
Well, you kind of covered several of the other bullets here, which is good, useful. I'm looking at them quickly. Let me kind of stop on this one. The current tenant receiver process does not work. Why not? Why doesn't it work?
There's a few things. So one is it's really just used in the very worst cases when things have often just gone well beyond the point of return. The building is in such incredible disrepair. And, by definition, this is a troubled property. It's more than likely that either the landlord does not have the funds to fix it up or doesn't want to fix it up. One property we worked out was a Sam Julian property on Kendall Street in Ivy City. And it was just in such incredible disrepair by the time there was a receiver. And what we see in these properties is then the receiver comes in, the only funds they have are the operating funds, the rent. So at that property, most people had moved out. They were only getting rent from a few residents. So there was just no possible way a receiver could make the repairs, getting a couple
So how do we
$1,000s
fix
a
that?
month. Well, this legislation that was introduced provides for this, a fund that the receiver could use to repair the property with an abatement plan. So saying that a landlord can avoid receiver by having a full abatement plan that shows that they have funding to make the repairs. And a receiver should actually be able to have funding to make those repairs. And I'm not sure how much the bill contemplates this, but I think looking at the possibility of getting receivers in earlier. I also think if we have a better receivership process, that might happen because really residents and advocates are very reluctant right now to use the receivership process because we see it often ending in displacement. So if there was a process that was funded and where we knew if there was a sale, the person who's buying it, as the legislation states, would have to show that they could abate. I think that would actually mean that we might want to enter into a receivership process earlier.
Which legislation? Is that the housing integrity?
No, it's strong, and that Councilmember White introduced it last week with, and it has a fancy acronym that I'm sure he can tell us, but I know it's the Strong Homes Amendment Act of 2025.
Strengthening tenant receivership and oversight for neighborhoods.
Oh, perfect, works perfectly.
Growth.
Yeah.
You like the acronym, so that's why.
No, I hate the acronyms. Not that one in particular, but I hate the acronyms. We just had bills with titles on them. My understanding is that bill was sequentially referred. So I think it's housing and then committee of the whole. No, housing. Oh, Committee on Business and Economic Development, then the committee of the whole. We'll take a look at that. It was just introduced, so.
Yes, we also haven't fully delved into it, but definitely
But
appreciate.
Let
the
me just say
internal work.
this, and I'm over my time, and I don't want to have to give equal time to Councilmember White. I hear what you're saying about the receivership process. We adopted a proactive inspections law a couple years ago. It's not fully funded. I think that's a way to try to, how do I want to say it? Intervene before these properties get so bad. But there still is this problem, which you said, which is when the landlord either doesn't have the wherewithal to maintain the property or is not interested in maintaining the property. And there's not an easy solution there. We don't want the tenants living in squalor. We don't want them displaced. But then again, the government doesn't own the property, so how are we going to get it repaired? But that is something we should be looking at.
Yeah, and I think that points to some of these like in-between pieces. Like right now, it works if somebody, it works that the landlord gets an NOI and says, oh, I didn't know, I'll fix these issues. Great. And then at the far other end, we have the Receivership Act, or we have OAG suing, but we don't have good things in between. It's not, we need some sort of rent escrow, we need fines and enforcement that actually work. I think DOB stated in the last hearing that they collect 12% of fines. So that's, that's not working.
So let me turn to my colleague, Councilmember White.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you to this panel. I don't have a ton of questions, but a couple things. First, to pick up on something the Chairman was talking about. I think the recommendation to create a new process for resolving housing condition complaints that includes tenants. If not your recommendation, we have to figure out something else, because the reasons you gave are important. People will make a complaint. Maybe something will happen. Maybe something won't. Maybe something will happen and it fixes it, but maybe something happens that doesn't really fix it. Like there's mold and they come paint over. And the residents left not knowing what's happening, what the next step should be. So we do have to find a solution to that. And there are a lot of complaints. And so, a powwow with every single one maybe isn't as effective, but we have to figure it out, because we can't leave tenants in the dark. We have to make sure these things are fixed. One of the things that bothers me about our processes, whether it's building or responding to complaints, is that we have to understand residents are not building code inspectors. So we are relying on government agencies and experts to tell us whether the thing has been actually remediated or just patched over. Residents don't know that. So I'm with you, and that's something that I want us to focus on. The other thing I want to make sure people are hearing is the consistency with which we hear complaints about mold in particular. Now, I can't tell you as the chair of the housing committee who's now responsible for mold testing. But everybody's saying it's not us. And I'm saying, well, who is it? And you get these really ambiguous answers. So hopefully with our government agencies today, we can get a clear answer on what agency is in charge of mold inspections. If a resident says there's mold, somebody has to say whether or not it exists. And I know they want you to check with your landlord, but then what? What if the landlord doesn't do it? Yes, ma'am, did you?
Even if you tell DOEE that you have mold in there, they still expect for you to really be able to locate where the mold is.
Right.
Because when they came out to my unit, they just came out and they walked around. They was like, well, we do smell something in the air. We're going to write that down. But when I went to Home Depot and got the the mold armor kit, and I did the culture of the crawl space door, because the mold was growing on the box that had my son's toys in it, in his closet. I got the culture from there and I sent off the money order to the lab, and that's how I got the results back. When I got those results back, I forwarded to DOEE, and that's when they came back out. They had someone crawl down there in the crawl space and do a culture, and that's how they determined that, yeah, it is mold.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now,
But in that process, we stayed sick.
yeah. And you said you have kids.
We have one son and he has autism.
Yeah, like kids can't live like that, seniors can. None of us can. It is particularly damaging. And we have a very old housing stock. So, we've got to get with the times. This is where we are. We've got to address it. Otherwise, these things don't disappear. They get worse. And so I appreciate the recommendations. I think there are things we have to do around receivership, around escrow. That's going to help everybody. Around proactive inspections, enforcement to Ms. Pasha. If the fines aren't getting it done, then we have to reassess. Is it the amount of the fine? Is it that we're not collecting the fines enough? But the fines are supposed to make sure that things get done, and that's not happening. And in fact, I have to make a a visit next week to Quebec House because apparently they've been without heat and water for some time. So I'm going at the beginning of next week. We've been dealing with this issue with Benning where, folks are without water, without heat, missing windows. I mean, we just can't allow residents to live like this. And, we have agencies for a reason. And clearly, we're falling down on the job. So we've got to pull it together. So I appreciate the testimony and am intent on making sure we close these gaps. So thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember White. Thank you, each of you for your testimony, as well, Ms. Woodland, who's online. So you all are dismissed. Let me continue. Denise Hunter L. and Nathan Hunter L. Are they here? They're online, maybe? We don't see them. Olafunke Idowu, Idowu is the last name. That person is online. Patrick Cuthern, policy attorney with DC Children's Law Center. Sunny Desai or Desai, managing attorney, legal counsel for the elderly, is online. Evelyn Arkachi Peter, who's vice president, government affairs residential at AOBA, is virtual. Amanda Korber, supervising attorney, legal aid DC, is online. Jeffrey Levin. Beatrice Evans. I think I'll stop there. So I called Denise and Nathan Hunter L. I believe they're not here. So then let's pick up with, I'm mispronouncing this, Olafunke Idowu.
Yes, I'm here.
Please proceed.
Thank you very much. Good morning, council members. I just wanted to, my name is Olafunke Idowu and I live in Ward 3. I just wanted to reach out about something that's really important to me. And I know that many other residents here in Ward 3, in the state of housing conditions and inspection. Quite frankly, the current system needs a serious overhaul. Too many of us are living in unhealthy and unsafe conditions, and it isn't just right. I'm not going to bore you with the nitty-gritty details, but over 4 years, I have been dealing with some pretty awful unsanitary conditions myself. Despite numerous calls to DOB and subsequent inspections, nothing truly gets fixed by the landlord. My building even racked up over $100,000 in fines at one point, according to the DOB dashboard. Honestly, it's been that bad. It has taken a toll on my health. I have breathing problems now, and it's a tough situation. But unfortunately, I'm not alone in this. It often feels that landlords know that they can drag their feet on repairs, and even after an inspection, because there aren't enough real consequences. We need to send a much stronger message, comply with the housing code, or there will be tangible repercussions. It looks like the DOB is a toothless bulldog agency, I'm sorry to say, and many other agencies too, especially the OAH, who refuses to allow tenants testify when landlords are eventually dragged before them. So from my perspective, here are a couple of ideas I think could help. The direct fines. I believe that DOB could directly fine the landlords like they do with the payments for child support, where they garnish their accounts and the monies are taken as soon as, if they get a job, if they don't have one. I think something like that should be looked into, because I believe what would only hurt is when it touches their pockets. The other idea is city intervention. So if a landlord still fails to make, the necessary health and safety repairs, the city could step in And I heard council chairman said that, oh, there's limited in what they can do. They might not be able to fund, but I believe there is something that can still be worked out and get the work done and bill the landlord for it. If they don't give them their renewal, their big basic business license renewal, if there are outstanding fees, they should tie this. RAD and the office that administers the license, if they tie this together, I'm sure that there will be more response on behalf of the landlord. So I know my time is up, so I'll just leave it, here. Thank you for your time and for listening.
Thank you. And I don't have a copy of your statement if you want to provide it.
I will do. Thank you.
Thank you. Patrick Cuthern.
Good morning, Chairperson Mendelson and Councilmember White. My name is Patrick Cawthorn. I'm a policy attorney at Children's Law Center. I'm testifying on behalf of CLC today. Thank you for this conversation. It's important and needed. Children's Law Center believes that every child should grow up with a strong foundation of family, health, and education. We at CLC have provided legal representation for thousands of clients whose children face unhealthy housing conditions. From this experience, we know that the district's system for regulating and enforcing housing conditions is fundamentally broken. And we know that CLC's clients and their children bear the costs of the shortcomings in this code enforcement process. The housing inspection system is broken at every step of the process. Families struggle to report violations because the complaint system available online is confusing, inconsistent, and is not available in languages other than English. Inspections are often delayed, they're limited in scope unnecessarily, and they are performed without communicating the findings or the ultimate result to tenants. After violations are identified, cases move to an enforcement pipeline that moves at a crawl, leaving families living with mold, leaks, pests, electrical and structural hazards for months at a time, while an overburdened adjudication process attempts to keep up. And even when fines are ultimately imposed, many go uncollected, and most importantly, for district tenants, the underlying code violations often remain unaddressed. My written testimony that I submitted for this hearing goes into quite a bit of detail on each of those phases, and it offers some suggestions for each, but given the short time today that I'm quickly nearing the end of, I'd like to focus on just a couple of items. First, given the significance of this problem, I'd encourage the council to focus its immediate attention on the adjudication process of housing code enforcement. That's where the process is currently bottlenecked. We know from reviewing data given by DOB's dashboard that there are currently thousands of cases that are awaiting either a resolution from the alternative resolution team or to be heard at OAH. This bottleneck is delaying the implementation of repairs and the assessment of fines. And as long as that bottleneck persists, even the best inspection reforms will fail to meaningfully protect district residents. To address this concern, CLC suggests that this council provide increased staffing at OAH, increased staffing for case handling and processing roles at the Department of Buildings, and expanded authority for OAH to better compel landlords to make repairs, and additional infrastructure, IT infrastructure for the Office of Administrative Hearings. I'll try to be very quick with my second point. But given that this is a systemic issue, I think that a systemic response is necessary. And while the focus of this hearing today is on the Department of Buildings, we've heard from other people testifying today that other agencies are involved, and they will need to be involved in a solution as well. So we encourage this committee to work together with the other committees on the council to perform oversight, to hold hearings like this that involve the many agencies that touch on housing code enforcement. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Mr. Cawthorn. Sunny Desai, I believe, is online.
Thank you, Chairman Mendelson and members of the council for the opportunity to testify. My name is Sunny Desai. I'm the manager of Legal Counsel for the Elderly's Tenant Advocacy and Support Practice. We celebrate our 50th year this year serving the DC community. Every day, we see seniors living in deteriorating conditions. Mold, water leaks, rodent infestations, broken elevators, and lack of heat are some of the most common. These are not isolated cases. These are systemic failures and should come as no surprise to anyone. Just this year, we've testified about these conditions at an October roundtable that Councilmember Robert White hosted. At a November voucher roundtable, my colleague Elizabeth Butterworth testified about deteriorating conditions. Earlier, later in November at the LIHTC bill hearing, my colleague Sophia Jayanti testified about the importance of tenants being able to file tenant petitions to address housing conditions. And then, of course, we submitted testimony at the Housing with Integrity Act bill as well. Ultimately, we believe landlords are responsible for addressing these issues, but Department of Buildings' inability or unwillingness to use its enforcement authority effectively has exacerbated these problems. The council's own report pointed to several failures in the DOB process, and these failures translate to real harm for DC's low-income seniors who cannot climb stairs because elevators remain broken, who suffer respiratory illnesses because of unchecked mold, or who wake up to rodent bites. And you've heard from some of these tenants earlier today. But I want to highlight one more client, LCE's client, Ms. D, who contacted Department of Buildings in May of 2025 to report a rat infestation in her unit and that her unit had no heating. The DOB inspector that came out told her that neither issue was a housing code violation and that instead these were tenant issues and it was her responsibility to fix them. Once Ms. D called LCE, we called the Department of Buildings again a second time to come out. They failed to send her a report containing the violations that they found. When she followed up to request a copy, she was sent reports for other properties instead of the correct one. We're still working with her today to solve these housing conditions. We recommend the following: mandate in-person verification of repairs before closing violations, tie fines to abatement with escalating penalties for repeat offenders, fully fund the proactive inspections bill that was passed, create a more transparent public dashboard. It's better than it used to be, but not fully navigable for a lot of clients. Also, give tenants a more robust enforcement mechanism. If DOB is not up for the challenge, then maybe the tenants should have some say in in the conditions they're living in. This could mean an affirmative right to rent escrow. It could mean passing the Housing with Integrity Act. Councilmember Robert White, in a hearing earlier, had a discussion with my colleague Sophia Jayanti about why are landlords able to raise rents if the conditions are not appropriate. Maybe that's something that needs to be looked into. Finally, when the landlords claimed that the sky was falling, seemingly overnight, the district upended the landlord-tenant court system. Well, we have tenants who have literal parts of their ceilings falling, and we're dragging our feet. So we ask the council to act with more urgency. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Desai. I don't have a copy of your statement. Did we get it? No. Could you please submit
We will
that?
submit it. We will submit it before the.
Great. Thank you. Kati Peter?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Good morning, Chairman Mendelson and Councilmember White. I believe those are the council members I see present today. My name is Katalin Peter, Vice President of Government Affairs for the Apartment and Office Building Association, representing more than 120,000 rental homes across all 8 wards of the district. AOBA appreciates the committee's continued ongoing attention to housing code inspections and rental property conditions. We also want to acknowledge the Department of Buildings for their ongoing work to modernize the inspection system and for their professionalism in bringing about this effort. I'd like to share something with the committee. Earlier this year, or I believe it was actually last year, AOBA took the initiative to establish quarterly meetings with DOB leadership as a structured way to strengthen communication and ensure our members can support the department's goals. DOB has been an engaged and constructive partner in them. I share this with the committee because it reflects the progress we are making together, creating a regular, proactive space where concerns can be resolved, best practices can be discussed, and operational feedback can move directly between the department and the housing provider community. These conversations have already improved coordination in the field and helped identify small refinements, such as clearer guidance materials and more predictable reinspection timelines that would further enhance the system for both residents and providers. Our feedback is being offered in the spirit of partnership, not criticism, and we greatly appreciate DOB's openness to ongoing dialogue. We believe that having more regular meetings and like what the council is doing now, these types of oversight conversations are ultimately going to be what improves the relationship between housing providers, tenants, and the agencies altogether. We also must recognize that DOB manages a substantial and very complex caseload. Inspectors often operate under significant time constraints, and AOBA members value their professionalism and the essential role they play in maintaining safe, high-quality homes across the district. As the council and the committee of the whole considers any future legislative or regulatory changes affecting inspections or enforcement, we encourage a similar type of approach, a balanced framework that supports residents, aligns with DOB's operational realities, and provides the regulatory clarity necessary for continued investment in rental housing. I thank you today for the opportunity to testify, and I must also thank the committee and the Department of Buildings for their continued leadership and for their staff's constructive engagement. AOBA looks forward to building on this progress of our quarterly meeting initiative in the year ahead. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have a copy of your statement if you could provide that.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Amanda Korber, who's, I believe, online.
Yes. Thank you, Chairman Mendelson and Councilmember Robert White for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Amanda Korber. I am a Ward 7 resident and supervisor in Legal Aid's housing unit. I've been a housing lawyer in the district for over 10 years, focusing on representing low-income tenants who are facing eviction, extraordinary rent increases, or the sale of their building. Over the years, most of my clients have been folks sued by their landlords for non-payment of rent, and in the majority of those cases, the tenants are living in unsafe, unhealthy, and unsanitary conditions. I've seen mushrooms growing out of moisture-ridden walls, mold all over units, perpetual leaks that cause ceilings to cave in over and over again, heat that doesn't work in the winter, unbearable rodent and roach infestations that make homes completely unlivable. It seems like every year there's a new slumlord making headlines in local and DC news, but the reality is these issues are widespread and exist in even homes that the DC government owns through DCHA. We appreciate the efforts this committee has made to address this problem through the creation and oversight of DOB, but the systemic issue of unsafe and unsanitary housing conditions is widespread and deeply rooted in an inequitable system. Legal Aid is deeply disappointed that the council chose to move quickly to pass the Rental Act and find a way to make evictions quicker and easier for landlords when we know so many landlords are neglecting their properties and forcing tenants to live in horrific conditions. We encourage the council to consider meaningful ways to hold landlords accountable for the conditions in their units, and here are just a few for your consideration. And just want to note the importance of finding new ways to hold landlords accountable, given DOB's abysmal abatement rate. Last oversight hearing for FY24, they noted achieving less than 50% abatement, 50% compliance for complaint-based inspections, which is just unacceptable. So again, here are just a couple of ideas. If DOB cites a landlord for a condition and it's not repaired by the time that it's required to be repaired by, a tenant's rent can be automatically abated, and they should not have to pay their rent unless and until that condition is fixed. Additionally, if DOB cites a landlord for a housing condition and it's not abated by the time required, DOB should work with the DLCP and suspend a landlord's basic business license so they can't file an eviction action against that tenant. The council should fully fund the proactive inspection bill and expand proactive inspection so the onus is not always on tenants to report their landlords, especially when tenants often rightly fear being retaliated against by their landlord for any complaints. DOB needs to stop letting landlords prove that they've made a repair via uploading photos to an online portal. And Transparency between DOB and tenants needs to be increased because tenants just don't know what is happening after these inspections and citations are issued. These suggestions are not extreme. What is extreme is that tenants are being forced to live in unsafe and unsanitary conditions for years, and the minute they fall behind on rent, they find themselves in eviction court for rent they shouldn't have owed in the first place. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you, Ms. Corber. And I don't have a copy of your statement either. It'd be helpful to have that.
Absolutely. I'm happy to submit it after the hearing.
Thank you. Jeffrey Levin.
Thank you. Chairman Mendelson, Council Member White, thank you. My name is Jeff Levine, and I'm here to testify about my personal experience as a landlord in DC. And I want to start plainly. What happened at 105 6th Street Northeast represents everything broken about the enforcement in the District of Columbia. Before discussing policy, I want to ground this in facts. Here are 15 of the most outrageous, fully documented, all caused by one tenant in one 225 square foot basement unit with no kitchen in a 7-unit building that has sat vacant for years because of DOB actions. One tenant blocked 93 inspections, and DOB cited me every time. One tenant kept inspectors waiting as long as 6 hours by refusing access. One tenant generated nearly 100 Department of Buildings complaints from a space smaller than some walk-in closets. One tenant filed TROs timed to cancel scheduled inspections and halt repairs. One tenant sabotaged Pepco electrical equipment, and DOB held me liable. One tenant called 911 when I was unclogging her toilet. One tenant manufactured a gas leak emergency after DOB suggested calling the fire marshal. Information obtained through FOIA, Mr. Chairman. One tenant rejected $40,000 in relocation offers and immediately surged complaints. One tenant refused entry to licensed contractors in front of DOB inspectors, and DOB still cited me. One tenant created dangerous environments for workers and blocked lawful repairs. One tenant committed assault that aired on the evening news 7 On Your Side and remained the most credible complainant in DOB's eyes, and in fact testified, council member, twice in front of your committee. The District of Columbia, meaning the taxpayers in this room, have paid hundreds of thousands of dollars in inspector time, administrative review, OAG litigation, court proceedings, interpreter time, legal processing, and emergency service responses. By conservative calculation, 100+ DOB visits, 6 years of enforcement cycles, $500,000 or more in agency labor costs. And who did one tenant weaponize? DOB, DLCP, DOEE, OTA, OAG, MPD, DC Water, Pepco, Fire and EMS, Small Claims Court, Landlord-Tenant Court, OAH, State EC, Legal Aid, and the Office of the Inspector General. 17 different judges across multiple courts have touched this one case. And yet DOB citing me, the person who opened the door every time while ignoring the person who blocked it 93 times. The result of all of this is that I could not obtain a certificate of occupancy, so I could not obtain a basic business license and therefore could not evict or register for rent control and legally increase her rent. Further, I've not been able to renovate or sell my building. I am basically stuck with no options to do anything. DOB says its mission is to enforce safety, act neutrally, verify conditions, protect housing, and prevent abuse. But here's what DOB did in my case. Protected obstruction, punished cooperation, rewarded false complaints, penalized evidence, acted on allegations, not verification, enabled fraud while harming housing that families need, allowed one tenant to consume more public resources than some buildings with 50 units. This is not code enforcement. That is a structural vulnerability that can be exploited endlessly by one determined actor. Here are 5 reforms that I urge the council to adopt immediately.
I want to note you're over your time. I didn't want to cut you off, but you're 2 minutes over your time.
Thank you. I'll be beyond quick. Serial complaint trigger, good faith certification under penalty of perjury, mandatory in-person verification, access accountability rule, fraud and sabotage and manipulation of cost recovery. Thank you for allowing me to go over my time. I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And I don't have a copy of your statement if you could provide it.
I will.
Thank you. Beatrice Evans, I believe, is online.
Hello? Can
Please
you hear me?
proceed.
Good morning, Councilman Mendelson and Robert White. Thank you so much for showing up for me. What I want to say is I am Beatrice Evans. I'm a Ward 7 resident senior who lives in public housing, a senior building. And I've been doing some door knocking and canvassing for an organization in the Northeast area. I've solved my problem, or at least it's in the working, and I'm very happy about that. Thank you, Robert White. But doing this canvassing and door knocking at these old buildings, and people invited me in their homes, and mice was running, and 5 stories, and no elevators, and no heat, and holes in the ceiling, and a lot of different ethnicities were there, and some could speak English, but I did have a interpreter with me, and they allowed us in this home to see all of these violations, and in the basements were dark and moldy. And so I just want to support those. And I want to thank Empowerment DC for keeping updated on what these issues are, because I am a long-term, on-time tenant, and I intend to be. I choose to be a tenant. I don't want to be a homeowner, but this is our homes where we pay these rent, and so we want our services on time. And yes, those DODB needs to do a better job. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. That's going to conclude all the testimony for this group. I have one question for you, Mr. Is it Levin or Levine?
Pronounce Levine, Mr. Chairman.
Levine. Was this the same tenant?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the same tenant has done all of these things
Okay.
I've mentioned.
Councilmember Robert White, do you have questions?
No questions for this panel. I really appreciate you all being here and the recommendations. So thank you. And then Mr. Levine, I'll look at your written testimony so I can dig into your recommendations more closely. Thank you all.
So let me just say, I appreciate all the testimony. Having a written testimony when you're testifying, I can then like hold it here and maybe ask some questions from it of Department of Buildings. So for instance, I don't have any questions for you, Mr. Cawthorn, but your testimony, which is quite lengthy, is helpful.
I apologize for the length.
No, don't apologize, and I will be reading it fully later. But for when I don't have the statement, I don't have the recommendations in front of me, it's a little harder for me to follow up with questions. But in any event, all of this is helpful, and we will be looking at all of the testimony. Thank you. Thank you, the two of you in person, and those of you who are online. Let me continue with the witnesses. Patricia Stamper, who's listed as a public witness, but I know she's an ANC commissioner. We don't see her. Damiana Dendy, who's a housing organizer with DC Jobs with Justice. Susan Kelly. Lee Simon, Amy Levine, Zachary Huke, Jan Baker, who's president of 2M Tenants Association, Wayne Jones, Rhonda Hamilton, Nick Weinberg, Gabby Morse Flores, Faye Williams, Perry Red, who's executive director of Sincere 7, Chantel Doe, Belinda Taylor, who's community organizer with Sincere 7, Aid, spelled A-D-E, Aid Thorne, and Mickey Event. So I'll call these names again. Sir, you are Jane Jones. And ma'am, you are?
Jan Baker.
Got it. So Patricia Stamper, we believe is not here. Demiana Dendy, we believe is not here. Susan Kelly, we believe is not here. Lee Simon, who's online, I believe. Oh, he hasn't accepted. I'll keep moving. Amy Levine, I believe is not here. Zachary Huke.
He is here. I think he might be the president.
Who's the he?
Mr. Fuchs, I believe.
Oh, Zachary Huke, well, when he comes in. Lee Simon did accept, so you're up.
Hello, did you say I'm up, Lee Simon?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Chairperson Memberson, members of staff, the committee, thank you for allowing me to testify. I want to start off by saying that there's a lot to commend about the Department of Buildings Housing Code inspection process. The portal for responding to notices of infractions and uploading abatement evidence is easy to use. DOSB staff, and especially the alternative resolution team, are responsive. I actually think it would be amazing if other DC agencies like DPW had a similar process for their NOIs. One area of improvement I'd like to focus on is DOB's policy of only finding property owners, even when the violation is clearly caused by tenants. 12G DCMR 106.1 already explicitly gives DOB the authority to fine tenants, but DOB chooses not to. By finding a property owner for tenant-caused violations, DOB is not aligning actions and consequences. For example, tenants who smoke in non-smoking buildings will often remove their smoke detectors. This is obviously a tenant-caused housing code violation. However, because DOB finds the housing provider and not the tenant, there is no reason for the tenant to change their behavior. This is a life safety issue for the entire building, and DOB is very aware that as soon as the reinspection passes, the tenant is just going to remove that smoke detector again. In fact, everyone involved, from the inspector to the alternative resolution team, to me, to OAH, everyone involved knows that as soon as that inspector and I leave the building, the smoke detector comes right back off. But everyone just moves on. A significant reason for fines is to create deterrence against future violations. But tenants know that they will not be fined for their violations, and therefore there's no deterrence. DOB will argue this puts their inspectors in a position to litigate landlord-tenants disputes. This is not the case. DOB has highly trained inspectors who will have no problem determining fault, which is almost always very apparent. DOE can limit tenant fines to instances in which the damage is obviously caused by the tenant, such as holes in walls or holes in doors, hoarding, failure to keep properties clean and hygienic, removing smoke detectors, etc. If the fault is not obvious, DOB should find the housing provider. But if it is obvious, they should find the tenant, just as DCMR tells them to do. In addition, the fine party, if they disagree with DOB, they can always argue their case in front of the Office of Administrative Hearings. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Simon, and I do have a copy of your statement, so thank you. Amy Levine, I believe, is not here. Zachary Huk, is that you? Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Councilmember White, and everybody here today. I appreciate the opportunity to testify to alert you to the deteriorating business conditions of the rental housing market in Ward 7 and 8. My name is Zachary Huk. I'm the Executive Vice President, Chief Operating Officer of CIH Properties. CIH has been operating in the rental housing business east of the river since 1986. We currently own and manage 2,000 units there, and our goal is to deliver an uncompromised workforce and affordable housing product to these neighborhoods. We view our residents as our clients. We've been serving them successfully for decades. Our goal has been multi-generational, ultra long-term ownership, but all of that is changing. Our portfolio, along with the broader submarket, is suffering extraordinary economic stress with staggering collections losses, high vacancies, and escalating costs. Many of our properties are operating at significant cash flow deficits. We're keeping them alive temporarily with the use of corporate cash and the use of property long-term savings accounts. But of course, this is not sustainable. The conditions of the rental market in Ward 7 and Ward 8 are deteriorating. But of course, this has been predictable. The city has set conditions for this business that are guaranteed to deteriorate quality and quantity of housing product. They've imposed price controls on revenue. This eliminates investment and upgrade of the existing product and foisted extraordinary and impossible regulatory costs and burdens on housing providers. A thought experiment as an alternative perspective. What if the city passed legislation eliminating price increases at grocery stores? A food price freeze. Shoppers would have cheaper food in the short term. They'd be happy. But in the long term, quality and availability would deteriorate because businesses cannot run cash flow negative. They will either sell before it's too late or face bankruptcy. For CIH, we have a standing policy of eliminating housing code violations at our properties. We are doing so even while cash flow negative. Other housing providers will not be able to do that, and for some others, it's too late. Marty Zupanchik, a real estate broker at Marcus & Millichap, reports over 50 bankruptcies in 2025, and as many more foreclosures and note sales in the same period, with many, many, many more to come in 2026. The housing market conditions in Ward 7 and 8 are threatening a return to the days of vacant buildings, rampant crime, and a lower quality of life for all. Except in the 90s, a drug epidemic might be blamed. Today, these conditions have been set by choice. The market is simply reacting to the reality of the regulations the city has imposed on housing. This is a self-inflicted crisis. I call today for a relief of housing regulations to ensure long-term sustainability of the affordable housing business and an immediate grant program to be funded by the city to save rental housing communities from bankruptcy. Even a $10 or $20 million program could buy another year of operations, a tiny fraction of the city's budget, but one that would offer immense value to thousands and thousands of residents in Ward 7 and 8 who depend on housing providers like us for stable, clean, and affordable housing, and to serve as the stable center of a community necessary for a neighborhood's health and wellness and quality of life. CIH has been deeply thoughtful about this crisis. 4 minutes is simply not enough to engage in real discussion. So I'd welcome the opportunity to continue to share our thoughts about the problems and the potential solutions to this housing crisis. Ultimately, the city needs to create market conditions to allow for the long-term sustainability of the affordable housing market in Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Huk. I don't have a copy of your statement.
I will send it. Thank you.
Thank you. Jan Baker.
Good morning, Council. My name is Jane Baker, and I've lived at 2M Apartments in Ward 6 for 11 years and have been the unpaid full-time president of the Tenants Association for the past 3 years. I do wholeheartedly believe that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. In preparation for being here today, I watched previous hearings, and one of the ladies who just testified had the same issues. It feels like deja vu. I was here on a cold December day last year, 1 year ago, testifying about the same things, but I'm here for solutions and not to highlight the very glaring obvious problems. Councilman White, you have personally been to my building and seen the conditions. You have seen the roof caving in, piled up garbage, apathy from the leasing staff. You've witnessed the mold, so you know that I am telling the truth. You heard the stories from the residents of the trauma and stress that they endure. The apartment that you visited with extensive mold did not get addressed for weeks. I am from inspections from DOEE to DOB with an interim strategy to facilitate stronger information sharing between the DOEE and DOB. I am also here to talk about fire safety. After trying to work with our property management on fire drills and fire safety after having a major fire every year for the past 4 years, we have not had a fire drill in the past 3 years. The property management scheduled a fire drill on a Monday morning at 10 a.m. It's going to be there for that. That shows that they do not care. The fire marshal told me that we were receiving, and his staff said that it was the worst fire drill he had seen in his storied career. I can't help but to think about the souls that perished in Hong Kong last week and the Grenfell fire in London in 2017. Those tenants complained with their government agencies, complained to the tenant management companies, complained to the contractors. Nothing was done and people died. We are going through the same thing. We have complained about contractors. We've complained to the tenant management. Nothing's going to happen. Is that what Washington, D.C. is waiting for before anything happens, anything changes? Do we need a tragedy in this city? Tenants Association should also have more power to advocate on behalf of residents, and tenants need more transparency with the Department of Buildings. On Amazon, you can see when the package is coming to your house. Why can't we see it, get a system like that so we can see where you are in the process? I made the suggestion with the DOB leadership a few months ago and with the inspectors, and we haven't heard anything. It's been crickets. DOB is a complete overhaul. Many of the inspectors are good, but those are good are overwhelmed, and the bad ones are really bad. They're so apathetic, and they don't care about reports completed properly. They don't take proper pictures, and they're actually doing the inspections without the tenant being present. And sometimes they're doing the inspection with the landlord being present. I am for only conducting in-person complete re-inspections that require tenant sign-off. The city should require housing providers to update outstanding code violations for entering into new housing voucher contracts. I do believe the DOB inspector should be able to be rated a survey like how a truck driver says, how's my driving? If their salaries were also based on feedback from us, the clients, their customers, things would change because money talks. Speaking of money, I'm adding an escrow to Housing Conditions Court, create a rent escrow and abatement process in Housing Conditions Court to ensure a more timely resolution of housing conditions in front of that court. I'm also in favor of not treating all property managers the same. Create a sliding scale like you have for tax brackets. A property manager with 7 years should not be treated the same as a huge conglomerate that is a private equity backed or backed by capital management company that has more of a risk tolerance. I would like to thank Empower DC for your unwavering support, the DC Council for hearing me, and the residents at 2M Apartments for not acting of disrespect when they have every reason to do so.
Thank you, Ms. Baker. I don't have a copy of your statement.
I'll send it to
Be helpful to have it. Where is 2M?
2M is located on North Capitol and M Street in Ward 6. It's right across from where the old DCHA headquarters was.
Okay, so it's northeast.
Northeast.
All right, thank you. Wayne Jones.
Grand Rising, Council Member Robert White, Chairman Mendelson. My name is Wayne Jones, and I'm a resident of Foggy Bottom in Ward 2. Thank you, Chairman Mendelson, for having this hearing today around housing conditions, inspections, and enforcement. I am here today in solidarity with Empower DC because the city needs to improve the system of housing code, inspections, and enforcement to ensure that residents are not living with unhealthy and unsafe housing conditions. I support Empower DC's Tenant Power platform around improving inspections and enforcement so the process works better for tenants and better holds landlords accountable when they do not comply with the DC Housing Code. Inspectors should communicate more directly with tenants throughout the inspection and enforcement process. They should notify tenants if they can't access the building or if an inspection time changes. There should also be more effort on the part of inspectors to thoroughly ask tenants about all violations, including ones tenants may not have originally included in the original inspection request. And I, as a tenant, should be able to know what's happening with an inspection and be able to track steps taken after the inspection, similar to tracking a package. The public dashboard has useful information on outstanding housing violations or housing code violations, but it should be more user-friendly, and I and other tenants would also benefit more or from more in-person options to receive additional support from DOB and to receive reports after an inspection. Inspectors, they should be in regular communication with the residents. They should do that before, during, and after an inspection to ensure the landlord actually follows through with repairs. We as tenants would also like the opportunity to meet with DOB on a quarterly basis to share our feedback and experiences with the process, hear updates from the agency, and ask questions. Unsafe and unhealthy housing conditions have serious impacts on our health and well-being. I and other DC renters need a stronger inspections and enforcement process that better holds landlords accountable when they don't comply with DC Housing Code. I ask that the council consider these recommendations to secure the health and well-being of all DC residents. Thank you for the chance to testify.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. And I don't have a copy of your statement, if you could provide that. Rhonda Hamilton.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Mr. White. It's unfortunate that we are in front of one another again. I've been coming for years to ask you all to raise the standards of how the council provides oversight for what we know based on today's testimony, many testimonies, to be a flawed system of oversight and execution for DOB inspections and for enforcement of housing code violations. In 2024, Mr. Chairman, you indicated that you thought that the fines that were in place were enough, and Mr. White here seems to wonder if that's the case. So after all these years of coming before you guys, at least 4, it amazes me that you still can't agree on whether or not we have proper enforcements in place for this continuance of slumlord reality for so many citizens. As a mental health advocate, I have continued to advocate before you, as the testimonies that you continue to hear, that these are not just about housing conditions and code violations. These are about the imposition of mental health diminishment and trauma imposition on citizens who have to compromise their dignity and accept these failed living environments. In 2023, Mr. Chairman, you indicated on video that you do understand that the DC Tenant Bill of Rights is not working. And so here we sit today in 2025 with the same problems, and it seems we're going in the wrong direction. In the past 90 days, I will share with you that across 3 wards, 4 communities, and 42 units, I have overseen 60% of rodent infestations that have obviously resulted in infractions, 15% of mold being present, 25% that represent electrical, no heat, plumbing, ceilings falling in, and safety hazards. I will tell you that the continuance of scheduling mishaps with DOB, inadequate numbers of properties that are tagged for inhabitability, enforcement of repeat offenders, and then also new properties that seem to have no heat or AC, which is very questionable. We are concerned that the Strong Homes Amendment Act falls short, but seems to show up just in time for the election season, where in 4 years, Mr. White, you have not found a solution. And the fact that you and Mr. Swab would choose a dormant fund as a solution, you still have not satisfied the intervention of the mental health components that many of these citizens will continue to endure at the presence of faulty and repetitive slumlords. My testimony gives you more detail. I'm convinced that DOB will not improve until our leadership is improved. We ask the council to act with urgency. The words insanity and shame come to mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hamilton. Nick Weinberg, I believe, is not here. Gabby Morris Flores is virtual.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Gabby. I'm a tenant organizer with the Latino Economic Development Center. So I'm here today to share the thoughts and concerns of the many, many tenants that I work with who interact with DOB, request housing code inspections, and I want to share the issues that have been repeated to me most often by these tenants to please take into consideration in DOB oversight. So the most common problem that tenants mentioned to me is a concern that the inspector was intercepted by the property manager and ends up leaving before the inspection has been done. It's unclear to me exactly what is happening in these situations, whether it's the landlord telling the inspector that the issue has already been resolved, even though the tenant still holds that the issues are pending. And so without trying to surmise what exactly happens in these situations, I still feel it's very important to mention this today, as this is the most common complaint that I hear from tenants, even tenants who are very familiar with the DOB request process and know how they're supposed to answer the inspector, let them in, everything like that. They still tell me this frequently, that management intercepted the inspector and they never came to do the inspection. Another thing that people bring up to me and that I have noticed personally in the past year is a change in how people are not receiving a PDF copy of the inspection report in the follow-up email that they receive from Department of Buildings. So previously, the follow-up email would alert to whether a notice of infraction was issued during this inspection, and they would attach a copy of the full inspection report. And within the last year, this has stopped becoming the typical practice. This does a disservice to tenants because having that copy of the inspection report complete with the tenant's name and their address at the top, citations of the exact part of the law that are being violated, time-stamped photos, and having all of this together in a PDF is extremely useful for any tenant who unfortunately might be involved in some sort of legal proceeding with the landlord. Having written and photographic proof of these conditions is such an important part of the documented paper trail necessary in any legal case to prove that a tenant has completed their duty of alerting the landlord to these specific housing code violations present in their unit. And in this same vein, right now, using the DOB public dashboard, there's no clear way to tell, to my understanding, whether an open notice of infraction was resolved due to the landlord actually fixing the problem versus the landlord paying the fine. And this distinction is important specifically to have documented if a tenant is in landlord-tenant court and needs to argue in front of the judge that the housing conditions issues have not been resolved yet. Another problem that comes up frequently is a long-time difficulty in tenants getting mold issues documented by the city. We have heard from DOB in the past with tenants that they say they're not qualified to determine the scientific presence of mold in the inspections. It has to be DOEE, but it's been very difficult to get mold inspections from DOEE, and I've been told that now they're going back to DOB. So this is an issue that is definitely comes up frequently, trying to get a mold inspection. An accessibility issue that comes up is the fact that there are very few, if any, Spanish-speaking inspectors, and unfortunately, there are a lot of Spanish monolingual speakers in this city who live in apartments that have housing code violations, and it is difficult to have a fully successful inspection with this language barrier. Tenants often tell me that they have to have their children interpret for them with the inspector. I know that DC has a lot of language access rights in place, which are amazing, and so flagging that this is a significant issue with having few, if any, Spanish-speaking inspectors. And then finally, I want to flag that many tenants ask me about the possibility of having a building-wide inspection for chronic issues that plague the whole property. As of now, I'm not aware of any formal procedure to request a building-wide inspection. I'm aware that that used to be something that could be formally requested and it changed, but I believe the need for it to come back is great, specifically for the issue of bed bugs. There's a building that I've organized in where I have spoken to more than a handful of tenants who have shown me either live evidence of bed bugs in their unit or photos of bed bugs on their mattresses and their belongings. When tenants communicate with the landlord about the presence of bed bugs, they do respond with appropriate fumigation processes for that unit. However, tenants have repeatedly asked the landlord to address the building-wide bed bug issue at the same time. That keeps existing because they go from unit to unit, and they have not received a response. Tenants know from speaking to their neighbors that others have bed bugs in their unit, and the issue continues to persist because there hasn't been a building-wide inspection from the landlord, from DOB, from anyone.
Ms.
And a
Morris,
subsequent
Flores,
fumigation
you're 2 minutes over your time,
Okay.
and I don't have a
was all.
copy of your statement.
Okay, I will send one. That's all I wanted to share.
Please.
Thank you.
Faye Williams, I believe, is not here. Perry Red, I believe, is not here. Chantel Doe, I believe, is not here. Belinda Taylor, not here. Aid Thorne, not here. And Mickey Event. They're not. But we're glad to see all of you. I do have a few questions, so 5 minutes. Mr. Simon, I think, oh no, he's here. Mr. Simon, could you very quickly, because I only have 5 minutes, what would be some other examples besides smoke detectors where you think a tenant should be fined?
I think when the tenant is responsible for the damage, it's pretty obvious. You know, holes in wall is a big one. I don't think anyone thinks that I go into tenants' units and put holes in their walls. If you see a shoe-sized hole in a wall, I think it's obviously a tenant. You know, doors ripped off hinges, we get a lot. Kitchen cabinets torn off walls. I think it's always very obvious. You know, if the roof is leaking, it's obviously a landlord issue. If there's, you know, hygiene issues, hoarding, holes in walls, things ripped off walls.
Okay.
Smoke detectors, I think it's pretty obviously a tenant caused issue.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Hugh, it would be very helpful to have your statement.
Yeah.
I did want to ask you, so we've made some changes in the law with regard to the eviction process, for instance, decoupling ERAP as an automatic stay on evictions. Just tell me, has that changed what's happening with your properties? I'm assuming that you're struggling with a lot of what we call economic vacancies.
Economic vacancies of, 10 to 30%, with the business underwritten at 5% and really break even at 10. So if you think of break even economic vacancy at 10, anything below that, the property is losing money.
Sure, but my question
Yeah.
is whether our changes in the law have you seen a difference?
I'd love to say yes. The answer is on the ERAP legislation, maybe on the margin. Frankly, without ERAP funding, it almost becomes a moot point because there aren't outstanding ERAP applications. There aren't these delays associated with ERAP. So on the margin, I'll say that legislation did help, but it wasn't material. We've passed the Rental Act. The Rental Act was diluted from its original form. We believe the Rental Act will shave maybe some weeks or months off of the time frame that it takes to repossess a unit from a tenant that's not paying. So right now we're at 20 to 24 months, and we shortened notice periods from 30 days down to 10. We eliminated process servers. There are a few administrative issues that will speed things up, but we're only talking about 30 or 45 or 60 days. So the L&T court has transitioned from summary judgment to now full-blown litigation process where tenants who aren't paying rent can request a jury trial. And when that occurs, we're talking about 20 to 24 months of non-payment of rent. And frankly, this crisis is a tenant crisis that's morphed into a housing crisis.
Sure, but
Because there's so many people with so
we are
so many-
requiring now that rent be paid into the court registry.
Again, rental act not law yet. Congress still has to review.
Okay.
We can certainly request a protective order, but it's only for limited circumstances. I think there were amendments passed whereby by changing the argument of non-rent payment, you can sidestep the protective order. If protective orders were guaranteed to be paid, if we can get a hearing within 45 days in front of the L&T system instead of 3 months, this problem would be largely solved.
So I'm going to have to cut you off only because I only have so much time. I have another question, but I think landlord tenant court is also suffering from the fact that we don't have enough judges. There are vacancies and the president has not sent nominations to the Senate, and the Senate, when it gets nominations, doesn't move them. So
Yeah, but-
everything's backed up over there.
15 seconds, the attorneys that we speak to say that's not the case. And I think even in the set-down report that you all produced for the Rental Act, it indicated there are many fewer cases, new cases being filed in L&T court. It's just that they take so long, they're jamming up and creating this huge backlog. So I don't think it's a judge issue.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Ms. Baker, you said that tenant associations need more authority.
Yeah.
What were you thinking?
So the thing about it is that a lot of times we want to advocate on behalf of the tenant, but we're not on the lease. So when, it takes a lot for somebody to take time off to be at home for a DOB inspection. So if the tenant association board member is able to be there to go through the apartment with the tenant, and give a witness statement and hold the DOB inspector accountable as an advocate for the actual tenant, that should be taken into consideration because the landlord, the property manager will say, well, this is not your apartment. You can't get involved.
All right. Thank you.
It's also smoke detectors.
Sure.
What happens when the landlords are not replacing the smoke detectors? When I talked about the Hong Kong fire in Grenfell in London, our fire smoke detectors are 10 years old and they've been cited for that, but they haven't been replaced. So what happens in that case when the tenants, the person who spoke before said that, the tenant is destroying the smoke detector. What happens when the landlords are not replacing them on time?
Fair question. Councilmember White.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you very much to these witnesses. I want to say one thing first. The timing of the cases in court is, according to the courts, 100% a capacity issue. We've met with them in depth, and the original Rental Act, which would have mandated timelines that the court said they cannot meet in any way, shape, or form, was a false promise, and I'm just not interested in false promises. We've got to get things fixed. We're hearing frustration from people, and I understand and share your frustration. The only people more frustrated with how long this is taking than me are the people living in these conditions. The ideal scenario does not require legislation because legislation takes a long time. Then you got to get it funded. So when that's the route you go, you're talking about 1.5 years before things get fixed. And that's not okay. So we go into these buildings with the agencies that should get it done. When it doesn't get it done, we escalate it. When that doesn't get it done, we hold the hearing. When that doesn't get it done, then we write bills. So we've introduced one bill, Stronger Homes. We have several more that will come out over the next several weeks. Ms. Baker, I'll make sure we contact you to see if there's anything from your perspective we're missing in those, because we've got to move, but it shouldn't be this hard. It should not be this hard. So I say all that to say, very much understand your frustration. I share it. I don't like how long this has taken.
Councilman White, with $55 million in unpaid fees from the inspections from Department of Buildings, before you get to the hearing, what's happening where they're not paying? Tell us why landlords are not, and to my point about having a sliding scale, because somebody who owns 2 apartment buildings with 7 units in them should not be held to the same standard as somebody. We have 315 units in our building. Atlantic Capital has a portfolio of over 100 buildings. So they obviously have the financial capital to run, they should have viable funds to be able to pay their fines. So before you get to the hearings, why are they not paying their fines?
Yeah. So that's something we're addressing in the legislation as well. Too many of them aren't paying. The agency would say it's a capacity issue, in which case we've got to increase the capacity, but we've honed in on that. I want folks paying the fines, and I'm looking at a sliding scale as well, because if it's not a deterrent, it's not working. So I'm with you. Thank you, Chairman.
Can I just mention one thing? Just say that before COVID, L&T Court was processing 150 cases per day, and now they're down to 50. So there's a huge backlog because of processing speed that has happened since the COVID regulations and since the new way of approaching cases.
We also have hit a record in evictions right now, so I want to make sure we don't oversimplify it. But I'm telling you, according to the judges that hear these cases with many, many conversations, there's no way for them to move faster than they are right now without more judges.
Councilmember Fruman.
Thank you very much. I've been listening to the testimony, very helpful testimony. Really appreciate it. Mr. Uke, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions. You raised something about the idea there were a certain amount of funding that could be used to help bail out housing providers. And it's actually an idea that I've been wondering about. Do we need some sort of a corporation that could process requests for bailout funding, like the Resolution Trust Corporation, ones for the banks? But I'm curious, when you raise that idea, how are you thinking about the mechanics? What are you thinking about in terms of steps that a housing provider would need to take in order to qualify for that support? What were you getting at with the comment?
And I did want to mention this for the whole council, that a Resolution Trust Corporation kind of idea, a strong amendment, is too late in the process. You don't want to have a housing provider go bankrupt and then spend the 10 times amount of money to clean up the mess. And so my suggestion is what we call the 50-30-20 plan. And it would model after the Housing Stabilization Grant Program that occurred during COVID, whereby the city allocated modest amounts of money. We're talking, $10, $12, $15 million to housing providers. And they would take that money and they would clear tenant balances, Councilmember White. So 50% of the tenant balance would be paid by the city. 30% of the tenant balance would be abated by the landlord. 20% of the tenant balance would be in a repayment note. So every party involved it takes a little bit of responsibility. And so modest amounts of money, we're talking hundreds of dollars per unit, to save this entire ecosystem rather than let it fail. And we talk about mold and concern. When a property is starved of cash and goes bankrupt, it leaks all the time, from faucets and tubs, water falling to the next unit, mold invariably. A bankrupt property is going to be filled with deteriorated and destroyed units, causing much more cost to resurrect these things rather than prevent the problems in the first place.
So was misleading for me to refer to a resolution. I was thinking about something that, and so I appreciate what you're suggesting. And there's an element of moral hazard. So anybody who hasn't paid rent gets it forgiven to the point of 80%. And so that.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
No, well,
the moral hazard bus has left the station. The moral hazard bus came when vast amounts of rental assistance were paid on behalf of residents during COVID. And our residents stopped feeling or getting that balance, that back and forth balance was arrested. And when rental assistance dried up, the behavior back to paying rent did not return back to normal.
No.
So I believe in moral hazard.
But some of these buildings are bankrupt because they're not good landlords. They're not good property managers. So people leave.
So I hear you on that. I'm going to pivot in a second, but I only have a limited amount of time. It's an idea that I've been thinking about, so it's very helpful to hear the way you're thinking about it. I hear you about a moral hazard issue that's earlier, but if it became law that there was going to be a bailout and you pay 20%.
Agreed.
I would, I need to think that through. And this, I'll let you respond to this as well. But one of the things that Mr. Hugh raised was the idea of tenant caused damage. And I do want to see stricter requirements on landlords. And the way in which the fine system works, the fines are raised, but they're not collected until the end of an OAH process. And in the interim, if the issue has been abated, the fines are frequently forgiven. And the reason for the fines is to get to compliance as opposed to deterrence. And I think we have that balance off a little. But I also, as we try to impose more liability on landlords, and maybe I'll ask you this question, how do we deal with the issue of tenant-caused damage that is sometimes serial, where something gets fixed and it gets broken again? And so you have a landlord who in good faith is trying to address an issue, but that work is being undermined. How do we get tenants in the game? I'm not saying that that is always the case or even mostly the case, but it is definitely sometime the case. What do we do in that setting?
So I think it can be multifaceted. There, number one, if it's a voucher tenant, why would you be able to get a new voucher if you did not take care of the property you were at before? Right? You should be held accountable. My father was a landlord, so trust me, I've been on both sides of this, right? Yesterday I was talking to our case manager and she said, on behalf of a tenant, she said, why don't you just move? But the mentality is, okay, I can mess this place up and then I could just move to another location and then it's going to be paid for by the government. But if a tenant is clearly and blatantly destroying the property, there should be something, mechanism put into place that they should not be able to be. I can't fully answer the question, like I said, in 4 minutes. To account the tenant side too, because I do understand. I've seen tenant inflicted damage within the apartment, right? But then you also have person also gets frustrated. Somebody said it before, this is also a mental health crisis. If you are calling and trying to talk to your landlord or your property manager and they won't fix things, look guys, pressure busts pipes and pipes don't just break from negligence. Sometimes people get frustrated, but in terms of a person who is not, and they get harder for them, I know that you need to be having referrals to be able to move to the next place and get harder for them. You need to understand that you cannot get away with destroying property. So that is a longer conversation, but depending on if somebody's market rate or if somebody's in a voucher, maybe just making it harder in either case.
All right, thank you very much.
Mr. Freeman, I just want to share that when we talk about egregious housing conditions and tenant inflicted damage, mold and rodent infestations and deteriorated floors and foundational issues, I would call into question the nature of these repairs that landlords are intending to say that they're doing. If they're not quality repairs, then how long are they expected to hold up? And I think that when you look at it, that needs to be considered.
I hear you. I'm over and I'll stop. But there are definitely circumstances where landlords are negligent or worse in the way in which they maintain buildings. But there are also circumstances where landlords are trying to fix buildings and tenants undermine those efforts. And I do think we need to deal with that reality as we impose more accountability on the landlords. It becomes unfair if it's accountability for something that they have tried to abate and are being undermined by the tenant.
I agree with you. I just would hope we would do the proper research because the percentages need to be observed.
I hear you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember. Thank you, each of you, for your testimony. And those of you who didn't provide statements, which was most of you, please do so. With that, we have the government. Keith Parsons, who is the Strategic Enforcement Administrator at the Department of Buildings. I'm gonna take a break, but I didn't. You look kind of lonely there, so we'll have to be nice to you. When you're ready, please proceed.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairperson Mendelson, fellow council members and staff. I am Keith Parsons, Strategic Enforcement Administrator for the DC Department of Buildings, and I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today. Thank you for your continued oversight and for your commitment to ensuring safe, code-compliant housing for all district residents. Today, I'm here to provide updates on DOB's housing code enforcement progress, share some challenges we continue to navigate, and outline where we believe strategic improvements can make the greatest impact. At DOB, our charge is clear. We enforce the district's housing and property maintenance codes to ensure residents have safe and habitable homes. As I shared in my January 2024 testimony, housing enforcement is one part of a broader ecosystem involving agencies, property owners, tenants, and the council. A key point that I always emphasize is this: DOB cites conditions, not causes. We do not adjudicate tenant-landlord disputes or assign blame. We document what we observe, and we recently published online guides for the public to better explain our limited role in such disputes and direct them to a variety of helpful resources. But once a violation is identified, regardless of how it arose, the property owner is legally responsible for correcting it. That clarity is essential for fairness and consistency across the enforcement system. Housing code inspections are conducted through three major streams: complaint-based inspections driven by tenants, basic business license inspections supporting the DC Department of Licensing and Consumer Protection's licensing decisions, and proactive inspections, which target buildings most likely to contain violations. When violations are found, we issue a notice of infraction, or NOI, a detailed roadmap of what must be fixed and how to avoid fines. Each NOI is an opportunity for an owner to take corrective action swiftly to avoid escalation. Since 2022, DOB has made substantial progress, and this is the time since the Committee of the Whole's report that was referenced in the notice to this hearing. We've made progress both in terms of enforcement output and measurable outcomes for residents. These gains reflect long-term investments in training, data modernization, and strategic organizational changes. Here are some of the most significant improvements since 2022. More than 60,000 individual housing code violations have been abated since 2022, a clear sign that owners are responding to our enforcement efforts. For the first time, we achieved 50% same-year abatement of housing code violations, a milestone that speaks to both stronger internal processes and improved responsiveness from owners. We collected more than $8 million in fines between fiscal year 23 and fiscal year 25, and referred $40 million to the Central Collection Unit for further action. Key performance indicators show consistent improvements in complaint response times, abatement confirmation, and enforcement escalation. District-wide, there are about 300,000 residential unit addresses, according to the Master Address Repository, and roughly 79,000 open DOB housing code violations across 17,500 of those units. But what this means is only 5.8% of units in the district currently have any violation. Last fiscal year, DOB performed 53,000 housing and property maintenance inspections, an increase of 8,000 over fiscal year 24. 15% of housing code inspections in fiscal year 25 found no violations. This demonstrates that many property owners maintain their buildings well and that DOB inspectors apply fair and objective code standards. DOB also undertook emergency abatement of housing code violations when necessary, including expending $100,000 of agency funds to replace water heaters in Benning Park, a cost that we do not expect to recover, but one that was essential for residents' safety. We also stepped up our enforcement against bad actors in the housing ecosystem, like Samraz Julian and Petra Properties, conducting special efforts on inspection and enforcement against their buildings, which have led to OAG action in both cases. That's the Office of the Attorney General. These actions also led to more than $2 million in fines for Mr. Razjulian across 81 properties and $500,000 in fines for Petra across 15 properties. These improvements demonstrate an enforcement ecosystem that is maturing, more effective, and more responsive than it has been in years past. In closing, DOB remains committed to protecting residents, supporting safe housing, and enforcing the law with fairness, clarity, and consistency. We've made real progress since 2022, and with continued support and thoughtful reforms, we can strengthen housing safety even further. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to answering your questions and continuing our shared work to make the district's housing safer, stronger, and more accountable for all residents.
Thank you, Mr. Parsons. We'll have at least one round, probably two. Yeah, 10. There were a couple of things in your statement that jumped out at me. One was, once a violation is identified, regardless of how it arose, the property owner is legally responsible for correcting it. I don't know how many instances there are where there's a violation that's tenant caused, but there was that testimony. What's the response to that landlord who's frustrated that the tenant is damaging the property and then he has to pay for it?
Thank you, Chairman. So the Department of Buildings does sympathize with landlords in these situations. But our understanding of the way the responsibility works is the property owner, landlord, is at base responsible for maintaining the property up to the code. And if a tenant who has a contractual relationship with the landlord damages that property, then that is an issue that would fall under that contractual relationship and something that the landlord and the tenant would have to settle between themselves in some sort of manner, some sort of adjudication or some sort of arbitration.
So your view is Department of Buildings simply looks at there's a violation, we're going to issue an NOI, the landlord may have to pay a fine, and if this is unfair to the landlord, he or she or it has recourse against a tenant.
That's correct. And I would add that when we talk about the fines, when we go through alternative resolution or even if it's at adjudication at the Office of Administrative Hearings, we do consider all the facts and circumstances when arriving at the final fine amount. So that is also.
So that leads me to another issue that jumped out at me as I was listening to your testimony. $2.5 million in fines, but we know that only a percentage of the fines are actually paid. That's a real disconnect. And I'm not talking about where the department decides to reduce or eliminate the fine. I'm talking about where the landlord, it hasn't been reduced and the landlord still doesn't pay it. Have we made any progress there?
The short answer is yes. When the enforcement report that's under draft comes out at the end of the year, you're going to see a fine number that is higher than past years. But, you know, the $8 million in my testimony, that's actual money received on the fines. Obviously, the $40 million that goes to CCU is not yet received, and the Department of Buildings depends on the Central Collection Unit to continue the pursuit of those fines.
So my takeaway is that that's still not a satisfactory situation. Let me move on. There was testimony about mold inspection, that DOE is phasing out mold inspection. What's going on there?
Well, the Department of Buildings sort of position on mold inspection has been consistent over the past few years. This has been discussed a number of times. If we receive additional resources to perform mold inspections, that is something that could be merged into our process. So
And that's consistent with legislation we adopted where we want your inspectors to be cross-trained, and that bill is subject to appropriation. But right now, DOE does mold inspections, and there was testimony that DOE says they're phasing out. Do you know?
I have also heard rumors that DOE is planning to phase out mold inspections.
Okay, I'm not sure I like that answer. Could you follow up after this hearing? And DOB reach out to DOE and find out what's going on. I don't think it's great that a tenant calls and says, there are problems with my unit. Your inspector comes out, looks at the plumbing, looks at the electrical, looks at the windows, looks at the walls. But when it comes to the mold, says can't do anything, and then somebody has to contact DOE. I don't think that's great. But at least there's somebody to call. If DOE is getting out of the business, there's nobody to call. So I'm asking that as a follow-up to this hearing, you get back to us, DOB reach out to DOE and tell us what's going on with mold. What is so there was testimony that intrigued me. I think, again, this is in a minority of circumstances. I see you're about to take a note. You got a bunch of people here who can take notes for you, don't you?
Oh, go ahead. I'm ready.
Okay, well, there was testimony that there's one tenant who blocked inspections like 93 times. I'm not asking you to speak to that instance, but how far can the department go when there is an issue and the tenant is not allowing access to your inspectors? Can you still get entry?
In order to gain entry, we either have to be invited in or there is a process for an administrative search warrant. That's a very escalated process used in only limited circumstances. So that's the basic answer. If someone does not let us in, then we can't go in.
Can the landlord let you in?
Well, the landlord is someone who can potentially let us in, right? Like if it's a part of the property that's under their control, they can certainly let us in.
Well, I'm thinking that leases, I think, often have a right of access by the landlord. So, I mean, if you need to have access in order to determine whether a violation's been abated, or you need to have access to determine if something in an apartment is the reason why another apartment is having problems, I don't think this is satisfactory that the tenant could deny you access. And that's the end of it. There's got to be a solution.
The solution is the administrative search warrant process, which is like any other search warrant. We have to present probable cause to a judge that there is a reason for us to be in the property, that there's violations in there. So it's a very high bar. It takes a lot of work to do it. But yes, other than that, we must get consent to access.
And you don't see going through the landlord as viable?
Well, the landlord can also give us consent. I mean, you're asking about these situations where the landlord and the tenant do not agree. And in practice, without addressing specific cases, if we show up at the door and the tenant says, don't come in, we don't go in. And, there's a diversity of situations that happen. Sometimes the tenant lets us in for the inspection and then doesn't let the property owner in. But if the tenant is denying access, we're not generally going to go in.
Let me move on. There was testimony that DOB is no longer providing tenants with copies of the inspection report. Is that correct?
No, that's incorrect, Mr. Chairman. The process for providing copies of the inspection report is the same as it's always been. If we have contact information to provide it, from the tenant, then we provide it back at the time it would be served on the property owner as well. What happens is there are situations where we just don't have that. And the primary situation is a proactive inspection because of how those are initiated. We are not going to have the incoming complaint contact information. And until it's conducted, we're not even, in fact, going to know which units we get into, right? Because some of them won't give access or not. But we do provide that to the tenant.
Let me keep moving. No Spanish-speaking inspectors?
I do not know how many of our inspectors speak Spanish, but I can get that back to you, Mr.
Would you? It sounds like you think there are some.
I believe there are, but I will get back to you with the
Okay.
number.
And in my 30 seconds, what training does the department provide to inspectors who are not yet ICC certified? And what happens if they fail to obtain certification?
We do train them to take the specific certifications. We primarily focus on the International Property Maintenance Code because that's the most basic training that they need. We also help them learn trade certifications so that they can grow in their career. And if they don't meet their certifications, they can be separated.
So they could be separated. Well, they will be or they could be?
There have been inspectors who failed to meet their certifications and were separated.
How does current training compare with pre-January 2024 when we released our oversight report?
We have done a lot of additional trainings since that time period. We had a code expert, an external code expert, give a training to all of our investigators. We did provide a separate training specifically on, like I said, the International Property Maintenance Code because it's such an important code. We have done language access training and racial equity awareness trainings, as well as public health trainings in partnership with the Department of Health and the Department of Energy and the Environment. So there's been a big uptick in the type and manner of training.
That sounds great. Let me turn to colleagues. Councilmember White.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Parsons. So I mentioned earlier that after getting complaints and seeing news reports, I have to go visit Quebec House with agencies. This is an apartment building that has had 8 outages of heat and hot water over the past 8 weeks. Residents say they haven't received any communication about when the problems will be permanently fixed. What is DOB doing to hold that building owner and property management accountable? And when can residents expect relief there?
Thank you, council members. So I'm aware of Quebec House. I know they've had issues, and the DOB is handling it in the same way that we do with large buildings that are escalated. So we're working directly with management. We do not have a particular timeline on the issues that you're asking about, but I'm happy to check on Quebec House and get back to you.
Thank you. What would it take to get a timeline on that?
Well, we will be happy to ask management and convey their answer.
One of the issues we heard from a lot of residents today, I had a housing conditions hearing a couple weeks ago that you testified at, and one of the issues then as well was mold. DOEE's website says that they don't test for mold, and so it seems that right now nobody knows who does mold inspections. My understanding, and I just want to make sure this is right, is that you're going to follow up with Chairman Mendelson after this hearing on the status of mold inspections. Is
That's
that right?
correct.
Okay. On fine collection, which one witness rightfully raised some frustration about, this is something that I'm frustrated about as well. DOB, you noted that DOB collected more than $8 million in fines. I think that's this year, and referred more than 40 million in fines, which is the substantial majority, to the Central Collections Unit for collection. How much of that have they collected?
The 8 million is across 3 fiscal years, just to be clear.
Okay.
And I don't have an answer for how much of the 40 million Central Collections Unit has collected.
Is that something DOB tracks?
The CCU tells us when they collect fines, but I don't have an aggregate number. I can ask for that.
Because my concern is that we continue to see these cycles of issues, and the data seem to indicate that the majority of fines don't get paid. And these fines are not necessarily a priority for the Central Collections Unit. So I worry that if you all are not pressing it or in charge of collecting those fines, and the Central Collections Unit isn't steadily reporting and letting the agency know how much of the fines are being collected, then this starts to shed light on why maybe some building owners don't take the fine seriously. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, DOB does work, directly with CCU. I think our relationship has improved, and my impression is that they do take the fines seriously and are attempting to collect our fines. I would certainly defer to them on what additional tools or resources might make them more successful. But we work with them directly. They're at the table when we're talking major settlements and stuff, because sometimes, there are fines that are on DOB's desk and another set of fines that are on CCU's desk. So we work very closely together.
Could you, as a follow-up to this hearing, send to the chairman an update on how many fines have been referred to CCU over the past 3 fiscal years, and how much of that has been collected?
I certainly can, council member. The 40 million number, I believe, comes off our dashboard and would be accurate to the fiscal years, but I can certainly follow up on the collection.
Thank you. Again, we're all focused on getting things fixed more quickly, and so I like the idea of DOB abating issues that are lingering, so that I don't keep hearing from folks coming to hearings saying, I've come talk to you about this issue and it's still an issue. Does DOB refrain from abating ongoing issues or complaints because it can't reliably recover costs, or are there other reasons?
The primary reason we wouldn't abate something would be, one, if it's not, there are 2 main groups of things we abate. One group is small things, and the reason we do those small things is because we have in-house team that can do a large number of those. It's grass and weeds, trash, those kinds of things. And on the larger things side of the equation, the limiting factor is money. So we have a certain amount of contract abatement money for the fiscal year, and it has to cover 2 things. One is very big, very urgent issues, right? If we find a building that's about to fall over or something, we find a hole that's about to collapse on itself, that money has to cover those issues. And the other thing that we put it towards is life safety, housing code violations. And so really the limiting factor there is just money. I talked about in my testimony, the Benning Park abatement is $100,000. That's a big chunk of the 1 million, 1.5 million we generally have for this. So that's the biggest consideration. Is this worth the cost?
Okay. I'd say for the people living there, it's worth the cost, but the pot is not huge, to your point. And I very much appreciate you all abating the Benning Park issue with the hot water heaters. I think half of them have been installed, and the other, I think 3 are going to be installed today or tomorrow. And you know, so there's some movement there. But there's 1,000 more problems, and we've got to figure out how to get them abated if the landlords are moving too slowly. How would pre-abatement lien authority expand DOB's capacity to pursue that type of enforcement?
The pre-abatement lien authority would likely increase the leverage over the property owner, because the lien is a powerful incentive. Because you know, when there's a lien on your property, if you try to sell it, then you're going to have to satisfy the lien. That isn't going to by itself increase DRB's bandwidth, because the way that the money limits DRB's bandwidth is we have to sort of front the money to do the work, right? And so that's a limiting factor, just because we have to pay to make the work get done. So a world where we have pre-abatement lien authority means that we have a card on the table to hold the property owner to account before we get around to spending the money. But it's not going to make the abatement happen faster unless it incentivizes the property owner, if you see what I'm saying.
Well, it makes the abatement happen faster if we do the abatement and there's a lien on the property until they reimburse the city.
Correct.
Okay. So it would happen faster.
It would happen at a rate controlled by how much money I have to go out and do the work.
So to that point, and this is, I'll wrap up here because this is something I think I'm going to have to say a lot of times in order to get movement. We pile a lot of money into building new buildings in this city, and the current buildings are falling apart. And unless we make a policy change to say that it is as important to maintain the housing we have as it is to build new housing, we're going to keep seeing these problems. So when we talk about abatement funds, preservation funds, there is so much pushback. And we talk about throwing money into building new buildings, there isn't. And this is, we are going to have to change our thinking here because to your point, we can only abate the number of properties that we have the funding to do. And the vast majority of our buildings in this city are really old. And the good landlords and the bad landlords alike need money to rehabilitate those without raising rents that price people out. So thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember White. The that fund with 1.1 million, is that the fund that we added the 500,000 for the Just Street? Or was that a different fund we put the 500,000 in?
Yeah, I believe so, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, but the unspent lapsed into the fund, didn't it? Apparently we didn't put it in the fund, but never mind. I'm going to interrupt for a second. We've been joined by some students from E.L. Haynes Public Charter School, active in the Liberties Promise Civics Club. Thank you for being here. This is a oversight hearing, meaning that we don't have legislation before us, but it's a topic or a subject. One of the agencies is under the Committee of the Whole is the Department of Buildings, and the Department of Buildings is responsible for, among other things, housing conditions. That is, housing inspectors who go out and look at whether property is being properly maintained and respond to complaints of housing code violations like lack of hot water, leaks. I mean, it's a lot more than that, but just as examples. And so that's what we're doing, is we're discussing how the Department of Buildings is handling that. We've had testimony from a lot of witnesses with regard to where the government could be doing better, and we're at the question phase. And poor Mr. Parsons is there all alone as we're throwing lots of questions to him, and he's about to get another 10 minutes of questions from Councilmember Fruman.
Thank you very much, Chairman Mendelson. Welcome to the students from E.L. Haynes. So great to see you here. A minute on Quebec House. I'm getting a lot of calls about this. Department of Buildings has done a remarkable job on Quebec House, actually. We had a lot of issues at Quebec House, terrible problems with rats. Department of Buildings came out, did a series of inspections. Thank you very much for that. Now we get into the cold weather and we're having these outages, which are a serious problem. 8 outages in the period of time, in a short period of time. We got to get this addressed. So looking forward to you being a partner on this. I'm going to be meeting with the tenants coming up sometime next week, but this isn't going to go away. And let's, to the extent that you're working with the landlord, we need a fix on this. Hopefully we can get that done. On the mold issue that came up, I hope DOEE is not thinking about stopping doing mold inspections in the middle of a fiscal year where we would have funded them to do mold inspections. So at worst, this is a hope that it could be that they are thinking that they want to get out of this business in the next fiscal year. If that is the case, I hope you all will be at the table to say, even if that happens, you need to fund mold inspections inside of DOB. Even if it moves out of DOEE, it cannot go away. And there's an internal conversation that happens inside of the administration now, and I would encourage you to be at the table urging that mold inspections continue to be funded wherever they rest, because we cannot be in a situation where we're not doing mold inspections. So less a question than a statement. Fines, this is a thing that we've gone around about. So fines are imposed and then issues might be abated and then fines can get forgiven. And so in terms of the dollar amount of fines imposed, you could have a very high level, but then they get abated, and so then they go away, and so the amounts of collections are small compared to the amounts imposed. And I get it that the philosophy is that a part of the philosophy is we want to get abatements, and so that but there is also an element of deterrence, and I wonder to what extent in your calculation around forgiveness of fines do you take into account how long it took, if there has been serial fines for similar issues? To what extent are you exercising discretion to continue to impose fines or a portion of the fine, even in the face of an abatement, as a deterrence against future failures on the part of the same landlord?
Thank you for the question, Councilmember. We certainly do use discretion and have a sort of rubric to have a penalty for taking too long. So the way it generally works is when you get the notice of infraction, you have your abatement time frame. And for emergencies, it's 24 hours. And for non-emergencies, it's 60 days. If you fix it within the time frame, you qualify for what we call deferred enforcement, where the fine is dropped. If you don't, then you go into the realm where the team has to settle based on all the facts and circumstances, including the things that you're talking about. Is this a property with a lot of violations? Did it happen on day 61 or did it happen on day 601? And within that framework, there is settlement discretion, but to get to the forgiveness phase, you have to get special permission. And if it's above a certain amount, it has to go up to me. So after you're outside of those timeframes, After you get outside of those timeframes, then we are making you pay part of the fines, even if it's, even if you're begging and pleading.
So I would encourage you to be firm in that phase. And I don't know whether there's a way to also say, well, if we've seen the same issue over and over again, even in the window where you have time for abatement, you still need to pay a fine because of the repeated quality of this. The concern that I hear from tenants is a landlord it takes a while to get DOB out. DOB comes out with a notice of infraction. There's a period to abate it. The landlord waits until the end of that period, fixes it, and then the incentive structure is wait. And I don't know how we fix it so that incentive structure is not to wait, because that seems like a inappropriate incentive structure. But the tougher you are, the less that incentive structure works. So I'd encourage you to be tough. Okay, so now flip side of this, because you heard about this tenant caused damage, and you are crystal clear about it, that you don't assign responsibility for who caused the damage. And there is a risk that folks think, oh, I'm blaming the victim, that there's lots of tenants who are not engaged in this activity, and there are landlords who are being negligent and worse. And now I'm focused on whatever universe it is where it's tenant imposed damage. But I hear about it a fair amount. I hear about it, one of the things is rodent and pest infestation. And a landlord will tell me, we have somebody in a unit who absolutely does not maintain that unit, and that's the source of the problem. And they are facing issues over and over again, and they do lots of things, but they still get snagged. Are you thinking about ways to try to deal with that issue? Because if we don't deal with it, we're going to get the claim from landlords. I think we need a mechanism where you can investigate that, or a landlord could contest the applicability of the violation or a fine, or ask that it be imposed, and then an investigation be done of that. How do we get at this issue from your perspective?
Thank you, Councilmember. It's a good question. And I mean, the first answer is there's already a way for the landlord to raise this. They can go to the Office of Administrative Hearings, and they commonly do raise this issue in front of OAH, and then OAH is empowered to dismiss the fines. They can also raise it to us, and it's one of the many things that alternative resolution can consider, as I've already testified. When I think about the problem in a broader sense, and I've talked to stakeholders about this problem, and on the one end of the spectrum, I hear from landlord stakeholders that are saying, why doesn't DOB issue fines to tenants? And the answer is, I'm not going to get any money from tenants. If you think it's hard to collect fines now, wait till I'm trying to collect fines from tenants. So that's not an attractive option, and I don't think it'll be effective. On the other end of the spectrum, the suggestion has been, well, just disappear the NOI. And that's also not attractive because, the problem may still exist, right? If the tenant takes down a smoke detector, they're still living in a property with no smoke detector. So between these two poles, is there a solution? I'm not sure, but it is a tough question.
So I hear you that you feel like you don't have a solution. I do think this is an area that we need to focus on to come up with a solution, because I think it's a real problem. And I also think, and I see Mr. Hugh over your shoulder, that to say, oh, well, it'll get resolved in the adjudication system. and when the adjudication system has been its own source of so much frustration. I want to be very strict on landlords that are not in compliance, but I have a hard time doing it if I'm also capturing people who are operating in good faith and it's someone else's fault. So as we try to make the system as strict as possible, we got to deal with this other issue. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember. Mr. Parsons, what changes has the department made to the intake process, including any intake forms, since our January 2024 oversight report?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we did go through a whole specific process around the form where I believe we submitted to your office and others requests for comment on what we should change, and we implemented we implemented a number of those. So yes, we directly, as a result of your oversight, reviewed and updated that form. Obviously, we're happy to take any additional specific feedback on our tools.
Are you getting any complaints about the intake process?
I cannot think of any right now. I'm sure there are probably some, and we're happy to take any specific suggestions. We want it to be as smooth as possible for folks.
I think there actually was some testimony that somebody liked. I don't know if it was intake, but somebody was complimenting earlier today, but we'll move beyond that. What is the current service level agreement for the scheduling of complaint-based housing code inspections? How does the department ensure that the service level agreement is met? And what happens when an inspector repeatedly fails to meet the service level agreement?
There is not a separate SLA for scheduling, but we do have an SLA for going and doing the inspection. And currently, that SLA is 7 days from the complaint. And you may notice in a change from 2022, that's half of what we were doing before. We used to have this 15-day SLA. So, and what we found, we have a new key performance indicator chart that reflects this. So it's a very aggressive update to that SLA. And as for the question about an inspector who is failing to meet it, obviously all of our inspectors are expected to perform and subject to, performance reviews and discipline if they are not performing up to the level we expect of them.
Is that 7 days business days or calendar days?
I want to say business days, but it should be on the actual dashboard, but I can check on that.
And was it 15 business or calendar?
I believe it was business before, which is why I think it's probably business now, but I will check on it.
So it's in half, but 7 business days is more like 10 calendar days, probably.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
How does the department address cases where violations persist after multiple visits?
Well, it depends. So the initial inspection occurs, and then there's a reinspection to see if it's been abated. Obviously, the case gets filed with OAH. It goes through the alternative resolution process if that's applicable, and it goes to the adjudication process if that's applicable. And of course, some cases, as I discussed before, we would consider for direct abatement after a period of time. But generally speaking, a single case is only going to have those options usually. If it's a building that has a large number of problems, if it's a owner that has a large number of buildings with a large number of problems, obviously we work with the Office of the Attorney General to do enhanced enforcement in those cases.
So your answer reminded me years ago, as in maybe 4 years ago, I visited, I want to say Woodland Apartments, Woodland Gardens. I probably have the name a little bit off, in Ward 8. And the problem was a lack of, I think it was a lack of hot water. It was either heat or hot water. I remember, so I'm pretty sure this was before the Department of Buildings became the Department of Buildings. The I remember thinking that it really wasn't very good that the government scheduled the return inspection to see if the problem had been abated. It was like scheduled for 30 days later. I mean, this is, I'll call it life safety. And but so just to use that as an example, and I don't know that I'm still with what actually happened, but for illustrative purposes, so let's say it's hot water. Hopefully that return inspection is much quicker, like it's a matter of just a couple of days. If the problem persists, so in that case, because it's not enough that you just would proceed with the NOI and the fines, what does the department do when the violation persists after multiple visits?
Well, that's, and as you implied there, we do re-inspect more quickly if it's a life safety issue. If it persists, we can consider it for direct abatement. That's similar to what we did, as I testified with Benning Park, right? It's a similar situation. But as I also testified, the funds are limited and
Okay, but so now let's go to a lesser problem in smoke detectors. So I call the Department of Buildings. There's no smoke detector. I'm not quite sure where I would do it, but we'll just use this as I call the department. Your inspector comes out, cites my landlord. You do a re-inspection. The smoke detector still hasn't been replaced. 2 months later, I call the department again. You come out. There's no smoke detector. You cite the landlord. I assume you cite them a second time. You do a re-inspection. There's still none. I mean, how long does that go on?
Smoke detectors, well, to answer the direct question, Mr. Chairman, if you keep calling us, we'll keep coming out and we'll keep citing. But smoke detectors and fire extinguishers are right at the top of the direct abatement list, and that's the capacity that we're actively building out. So I hope to see a future state where for smoke detectors and fire extinguishers, it doesn't continue any longer than it takes us to get out and fix it.
So if it's a lesser offense, you'll just keep coming out every time I call? And we'll just keep doing this for like 6 times a year?
If it's a lesser offense, it would continue until we have enough money to also fix lesser offenses, or the building as a whole deteriorates to where it can be targeted for enhanced enforcement. It's a question of, priorities and resources, yes.
What steps has the department taken to improve the accuracy of NOI, notices of infraction, the accuracy of NOI delivery since our oversight report in January of last year, especially given past issues with incorrect mailing addresses?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Chairman. So we've primarily put a lot of energy into developing a sort of automated service process. And that has been an iterative exercise, and it improves over time. And as sort of a look back on the council's report from 2022, we did some analyses of our own to kind of figure out, well, when do we know for sure that someone has received their notice of infraction? And we looked at, for each NOI, do we know from some other information whether they have come back and said, hey, what's going on with this NOI, which implies that they actually got it. And in aggregate, across the years since 2022, we're up to 65% confirmed. And I would add that that's on top of, we don't send it out without legal service. So we're sending it to a address, which is the correct address, legally speaking, and we believe is a good address for service. So we know of that, overall since 2022, 65% of those, some confirmed touch. This is a process where the longer it goes, the more likely it is that someone comes back, right? Maybe you leave the mail on the table for a week. Maybe you don't think about it until you're also being summoned by OAH. And what we found is if we look back at fiscal year 22, which is the same period that the council was analyzing, over time, 80+% have come back to us. So 80% were actually getting out there and doing their job of attracting the attention of the landlord. But it's an iterative process, and we look forward to improving it. Obviously, if we don't get a response, then the best result is a default that goes and becomes a lien and goes to CCU, and they do what they do to try to collect it.
I'm a little confused. You said 65%, but you also said 80%.
Yes, the 80% is specific to NOIs issued in fiscal year 22. So of those NOIs, 80% of them we got response back as of the time that we did this analysis. And for the more recent years, it gets less, not because the process is getting worse, but because a lot of these response times that we're looking at are subsequent things like, did you come to OAH? Did you come to ART? Did you put information in the portal? They're things that take time.
So 2022 was 3 years ago. Over 3 years, there are more opportunities for what you call confirmation than in 2025, where there's less opportunity for confirmation. But it is your testimony that service has gotten better.
Correct.
The department has been utilizing email addresses to send some NOIs. How does the department verify the email addresses used to serve NOIs?
We have a staff member whose job it is to watch for failed delivery. And if they see a failed delivery, we will send it by another address or paper mail. Our system can identify when an email is not delivered.
Is part of the process when the email bounces back to try to also get a better email address?
Yes, that could be part of the process.
In what ways does the department keep tenants in the loop about the status of a complaint? What, if any, copies of documentation, such as an NOI or evidence of abatement, does the department provide the tenant?
The department prepares a tenant copy of the notice of infraction. And as I testified previously, that's provided if we have a complaint-based case where we have contact information. For any other tenant, they should just reach out to us, right? If we don't have the contact information, or if you just don't get it, reach out to us. We are happy to provide it. And we do affirmatively provide it in complaint-based cases where we know who is asking for it.
How do assessors, excuse me, how do supervisors assess the quality of an inspection?
So every NOI is subject to supervisory review before it goes out. And the supervisor there is looking at the citations to see if the inspector is citing the right things. They're looking at the evidence, to the pictures, to see if the pictures are supportive of the citation. They're looking at the substance of the work. Another way that we are sort of looking at quality of an inspection is we are in a campaign this fiscal year to reduce or eliminate no access inspections. So some inspections, you go out, you knock on the door, you don't get in. That's a thing that happens, and it probably can't ever be totally eliminated, but it's not a substantive finding. And so we are trying to decrease that. We're decreasing the amount we pay the resident inspectors for no access. And it is something that is tracked on an individual level by the supervisors for the FTE inspectors. So that's another thing that we look at in making sure that the inspection is effective.
Now, your answers began with saying every NOI is subject to supervisory review. Being subject to is not the same as every NOI gets supervisory review. Does every NOI get supervisory review?
Yes. For an NOI to be served, it has to go through affirmative supervisory review and approval. And then it also has to be reviewed and approved by the civil infractions team. So if it doesn't get those reviews, it doesn't go out.
With over 9,000 NOIs pending at OAH, what is the department doing to reduce the backlog and expedite resolution?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I almost want to say everything I've already talked about, right? Alternative resolution. You know, we've done landlord roundtables to increase that impact. I believe one of the witnesses testified about how we have regular meetings with AOBA to also get the word out. And I did a interesting analysis on this question internally, and I looked, although you could probably duplicate it on with the dashboard evidence. I looked at the number of NOIs and inspections that are being performed by DOB, and those increase, right? Like every year, even before, I looked back to fiscal 2020. So even from the DCRA days till now, our bandwidth on NOIs and inspections is going up. And the cases filed at OAH actually peaked in fiscal 23. They've stayed relatively the same in over 24 and 25, a little under 10,000 cases. But if you consider that against the bandwidth and the number of inspections going up and up and up, you know, and you can see the impact of us diverting some of these cases, some of these NOIs and some of these inspections away from OAH and into alternative sources of resolution. So for fiscal 24, for example, only 72% of NOIs that were generated were filed at OAH. And that was only 18% of the inspections, right? Like 18% of inspections are turning into something that ends up at OAH. And if you go back to 2020, it's 96% of NOIs that go straight to OEH. It was just a much smaller number. So it's a complex problem, but we are doing work that is demonstrably diverting a significant stream into alternative resolution.
The 98% was what year?
96%, that was fiscal 2020.
How many housing code complaints were received in fiscal year 2025?
We received 13,048 housing code complaints in fiscal 2025.
How many of those were resolved through the alternative resolution track?
So our data doesn't crosswalk exactly between a complaint and an ART resolution, but we're resolving about 5,000 ART cases a year.
What steps is the department taking to ensure that landlords are aware of the alternative resolution track?
Every notice of infraction has a full-page letter that's like, welcome to ART, here's what ART is, please do ART instead of going through the OEH process. And in addition to that, there's the community outreach that I mentioned, landlord roundtables. I talk about it every time the Built Environment Enforcement Working Group meets, I talk about ART.
What, if any, criteria does the department use to determine whether a case should be resolved via ART?
Every case could go to alternative resolution. The biggest requirement is that almost always you have to fix the problem. If you've abated a violation, then ART can talk to you and make you a deal. And there are a very, very small number of cases where something unusual is going on and an unabated violation will go through the ART process. But generally speaking, every case can go through ART if the landlord abates.
How many liens did the department place on rental properties for housing code violations in FY25?
We filed liens at 687 addresses, total value $1.1 million.
Currently, what criteria triggers the escalation of a fine to a lien?
Once DOB receives a final order, we will place a lien on the property for the value of that final order. That basically is the government's operative lien for 180 days. And then we transfer, if it hasn't been paid, we transfer to the central collection unit, and they will normally impose their own lien because they own the debt from then on out. So they use their own lien.
And this is a final order from OAH?
That's correct.
How frequently does the department use its authority to abate violations directly?
As I testified before, it's kind of a function of what, how much money we have and what is available to abate. We do it as much as we can within those parameters. There's an abatements tracker on the dashboard as well, although I'll caution that it tracks what we call an abatement cap in our system, and it's hard to tell what's underneath that. That could be like one instance of mowing the grass, or it could be Benning Park looks the same in the system. So when you're talking about frequency and what's abated, it's a little bit complicated.
So how much money is in the fund this year?
I want to say there's 1.1 to 1.5 available for contract abatement. The fund itself goes to a broader set of uses, but I can get back to you with the exact number.
You said for contract abatement.
Yes, there are two types of abatement. One is where we use our internal assets and they go out and they cut and clean a property or they
Asset
pick up
meaning
trash.
people.
Correct. And the other is where we have a stable of contractors that we pay to do larger jobs. And that's things like board ups, that's things like demoing unsafe buildings or bracing unsafe buildings.
So what additional resources would be needed to expand the capacity to meet the need?
Well, the nice thing about this question is the resources, the impact scales with the amount of resources. So if I have twice as much money in contract abatement, I will be able to do twice as many things. You know, within that rubric, more money means we can fix more things.
So if we put 50 million into the budget, would that be more than you need?
Well, there are 79,000 open violations. I think that would take a big bite out of it. But I don't know for sure. It sounds like it would be a good guess at trying to literally fix everything.
No, I'm not saying we're going to do that. In fact, I highly doubt that we will, but I was trying to explore if there's a limit to what additional resources would be useful.
Understood. And I think the way to think about that question is to conceptualize the aggregate, right? That's why I went to the 79,000 outstanding violations everywhere in the district. And the top end is the cost for the government to go fix literally every one of those things. Obviously, that's not where you want to set it because some of those will be fixed by the property owner. But it is difficult to know exactly where the line is in terms of what's going to be most impactful for the government to do.
I'm looking at testimony from the Empower DC folks. They had a number of recommendations. I don't think I'm going to ask you about each one. I think I'm going to sort of run through all of them and then ask for your reaction. Formalize the alternative resolution team into a structured hearing process that includes tenant participation, mediation, and rent escrow. I think part of the idea here is that you'd have more tenant participation, but I think also, and this is another one of their bullet points, create a rent escrow system in either the alternative resolution team process or housing conditions court where tenants can pay rent into an escrow account while seeking repairs. This is currently only available through landlord tenant court. which burdens the court and also risks the tenant with an eviction proceeding. Ensure that landlords can only take rent control annual increases if their unit is or units are in substantial compliance with the housing code. Prioritize the use of DOB's nuisance abatement fund to make life safety repairs when a housing provider fails to. Create a nuisance property tax bracket, require landlords entering into new subsidy contracts. New contracts with DCHA to abate any outstanding housing code violations. Create a more effective tenant receivership process. Current process doesn't work. Receivers do not have funds to fix failing properties, and the result is often resident displacement. One critical piece to look at will be to ensure that receivership can be entered into early enough for the property to be saved. So that's kind of a quick run through of the recommendations. What's your reaction?
I mean, some of those things are outside of DOB. I mean, improving the receivership process, I think is a good idea, but I don't know, that's outside of DOB, so I don't know exactly how to do it, but I have experienced that it has limits, right? We've sent several properties to OAG through receivership, and sometimes that is the solution, sometimes it is not. The escrow account idea, I think giving that to DOB would be a bad idea. We'd have to, we don't really have any experience with that, right? We don't even hold our own money. The chief financial officer basically does our banking. Making art more formal, I think, is not a good idea, because part of what is good about it is that it's flexible and that it does allow the team to consider all the facts and circumstances. And, the idea behind it is that there's a need for a sort of dispute resolution between the tenant and the landlord. And I think we do have a number of different legal avenues for that. So I don't know that that is going to be helpful, and it is going to be something that would be super resource intense for the Department of Buildings to take on. Because right now we are focused primarily, although we're happy to inform the tenants, we're happy to work with the tenants. Once it gets to the fixing, we're working primarily with the landlord, primarily incentivizing them to deal with the structure of the building, which is our expertise. We don't have particular expertise in resolving interpersonal disputes.
I'm sure we touched on this before, but I want to ask it again in this way. What can be done, what can DOB do to improve the collection rate on fines imposed for housing code violations?
Well, the Department of Buildings isn't a collection agency. So I guess the first thing we do is support the central collection unit and making sure they have the tools that they need. In terms of our own operations, it is not designed to do that. So, but I mean, if there are ideas to have us collect more money, I'd be happy to do them, right? Like if I knew a way to get more of the fines through the door, I would certainly do it. It's something that concerns me as well.
Well, I think the fines are important. So I get it that the goal here is to improve housing conditions. So it's not about fining people and collecting fines. Issue a fine, they fix the violation. Maybe we don't need to collect the fine or we can reduce it. But if a landlord discovers that, well, gosh, they can just ignore the fine and they don't fix the condition, we're not improving the situation. And in fact, we may be sort of incentivizing them to just sort of flout the whole process. And that's certainly not only not the goal, but counterproductive. So this is a question we've been asking for years. How do we improve the collection process?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and I think you should think about this as a series of 3 different challenges that all are unique, and 2 of which are more DOBs than the third, right? The first bucket is detecting the violations, going out and finding what's broken. And in that, we have gotten good and better every year, right? Every year, the number of inspections increases, number of NOIs increases. We are building capacity there. The second bucket is getting those things fixed, confirming that they're fixed. And this is another thing where we have increased, but it is a subset of all the things that we found that are broken, and it has its own challenges. And then the third is for things that aren't fixed and are reduced to fines, how much money can we get? It's another bucket, it's another set of challenges. And I agree, the system is difficult, and there's a lot of different angles, but DOB has really improved a lot in the first bucket. We are ramping up in the second bucket, and we support central collections ramping up in the third bucket, and us supporting as much as we can.
This may be my last question. How many inspectors is DOB budgeted for, housing inspectors? And maybe when you answer that, because now I'm remembering sometimes it's inspectors versus supervisors, so explain that. And then how many positions are filled or vacant?
I will have to, I believe, get back to you on that. But can I clarify, do you mean this year's budget, next year's budget?
As of December 5th.
Yes, I can get back to you on that, Mr. Chairman. But when I will say that we lifted, when the hiring freeze was lifted, one of the first things we did was a major inspector hiring event, and we've hired several people since then. So we're jumping right on, making sure we're at full strength.
So when you provide the answer, they're inspectors and then they're supervisors who I think of as being inspectors, but they're supervisors. So explain the answer when you give it to me. And then, as I said, I'm looking for filled or vacant. It's sort of however you want to answer it. So just to kind of go over, you'll follow up with that. You will follow up with how much of the 40 million at the Central Collections Unit the CCU has collected. You'll also get back to us on what's going on with mold in the Department of the Environment. And you're also going to get back to us on number of Spanish-speaking inspectors. I think that was everything. If there's anything I left off the list that you also wrote down, include that too.
I also had 7-day SLA business or calendar and Quebec House. Well, this might have been from Councilmember White, Quebec House timeline and outages. So I will get all of those things together.
Okay. That's going to conclude this hearing. This has again been a hearing on housing code inspections and rental property conditions. The record in this matter will be open for 2 weeks. That is, it will close at 5 p.m. on Friday, December 19th, 2025. The time is 12:57 p.m. I want to thank all the witnesses, and this hearing is adjourned.